it's something um, so yeah, I think it's great that we hold an event dedicated to public engagement. And I'd like to thank Pete for putting a lot of the work in organising this. Before we go, we do have a few housekeeping things which I'll just go through. So first of all, here's the agenda. You can see we'll begin with some introductions, some updates on what we've been doing as a UKT. We'll have a quick break, and then we'll get into the main bit of this meeting, which is on public engagement. And we've got some public speakers. If you go to the next slide with housekeeping. First of all, the most important thing is we're going to be recording the whole of this session. If you don't want to be recorded, please keep the camera off and don't speak. Use the chat if you have any questions. So just to be clear, we'll be recording presentations and also all of the Q&A and discussion, and that will be put publicly on YouTube. So again, just to emphasize, if you don't want to be in that recording, keep the camera off and don't speak, just use the chat. So the recording already started. We'll scrub the first bit of it and we'll start recording from around about, we'll start publishing from around about now, or when everyone leaves. As always, we have a code of conduct. You can access that from our website or from the link. To summarize, it is pretty much fairly sensible. Basically be nice to each other, be considerate of each other. If you do have any issues, please contact one of the co-chairs, either on chat or Slack or email or whatever. Probably the most important thing for today is we have a shared HackMD. So if you click on HackMD now. So for anyone who hasn't come across it before, you can think of HackMD as kind of like a different version of Google Docs. We've set it up so literally anyone can go to this link and edit it. So I know a few people have already started typing the name in. If they haven't, hopefully Pete will just scroll down now to it. And as you can see, yeah, you just click, start typing. As you note, there's different views of this doc. So there's the view that Pete's showing at the moment is kind of the edit view on the left and the sort of rendered view on the right. You can switch between them using icons in the top left. I say, if you do have any problem, I'd emphasize these notes are collaborative. So one big, important aspect of UKTA meetings is that they're very much grassroots meetings run by the community, and we usually try to encourage everyone to share the note taking. So Pete, you might scroll down a bit. You see this collaborative notes section. I say, everyone, please just put your notes there. You can put your name there if you want. You don't have to. Don't worry about if someone else is typing the same thing or if it's not quite the same style of language or whatever. Don't worry about any of that. Please just put the notes down, and we'll write all the notes up and put them into some sort of legible format afterwards. So this is very much about getting down everyone's thoughts. If you do any problems, I say just probably ask in the chat. If you go back to the next slides now. So I say all the co-chairs here are here. The co-chairs are here to help. So myself, Pete, Cass, David, who unfortunately can't make it, though he might turn up at some point, and Madeline, we're online. You can message us directly if you need to through Zoom or say email, Slack, whatever. For this meeting, we'll be using the chat and the Q&A features. So for the first set of presentations, if you have any questions or just comments, please just use the Zoom chat. There's a screenshot there for anyone who's a bit lost. So just click on chat. For the panel session, we'll be using more formal Q&A feature of Zoom. That just makes it a bit easier for us as sort of co-chairs and facilitators to manage all the questions and coming in, check the questions have been answered and so on. So that's a separate button, which you should see on the toolbar, but don't worry, we'll remind you of that again just before the panel. And then as I say, the whole of this thing has been recorded. Okay, next slide, please. So again, this agenda for so if you've been to these meetings before, you probably know all this, but for the benefit of anyone who hasn't, the UKTA community was started just over maybe 2.5 years ago. And the idea behind it was to bring together people working on TREs from across the UK into one sort of central place. Prior to that, loads of people were working on TREs, but the communication was very much fragmented. Like, people knew there were other people working on it, but there wasn't one central place everyone could chat. And more importantly, there wasn't really one place where people from all different areas of TREs could come together. And one of the ideas behind the UK TRE community was to bring people from any part of the UK, and I think we might even be broadening out beyond the UK now in some cases. And it's not just for people who work on TREs, it's for literally anyone who's involved in TREs. So people using them, people whose data is in them, i.e. the public, people who research them, people who develop them, people who commission them, say policy funders, politicians who ultimately fund this and set the direction of this work, and funders. And ultimately, it's meant to be, it's very much a grassroots association. We want you all to get involved. If you've got an idea, just come along. If you've got any comments, just come along. It's not intended to be highly structured. It is very much about getting people to collaborate and share information in an informal manner, regardless of what you work on or the level of knowledge. So if we go to the next page, these are current co-chairs. So one to note that Balint had to step down. That's mostly due to conflict of interest because they are funding potentially some of the working groups that UKT are involved in. But that's not a problem. I'm hoping that he can still stay very much involved. They're the co-chairs you've seen now. And just to emphasize, this is very much a community-run grassroots thing. Just because you're a co-chair doesn't give you necessarily any more power than anyone else. It's just as a co-chair, you're really about facilitating how the community runs, helping put events together, finding people. But it's not necessarily about setting direction of UKT. It's about taking input from everyone else and representing what people want and making that happen. So if say we are all volunteers, if you'd like to help out, please join us. If you don't want to be a co-chair, but you just want to help out in a more lesser informal manner, that would be great as well. If you do, just contact us either on Slack or in chat here, email, anything as usual. So to get us all started, we've got a bit of just a bit of an icebreaker. So we use something called Slido. If you go to that link, which hopefully Cash will be pasting into the chat in a minute, or follow the link, we'll get to just a quick icebreaker where we're going to ask you, how do you think the public should be involved in TREs? So I say, Cass, do you have the link, Andy? If not, just go to everyone just go to slido.com and type in the number 4008387. That's it. Well, thanks, Amy.
It is at the top of the shared notes list as well.
There's some great comments here, like meaningfully is obviously standing out. But it's also good to see that people think they should be like all the way through. But it's not just about them bringing them in at that one stage. So that's great. Pete, do you want to carry on?
Yeah. Thank you, Simon. My blimmin' mouse has decided to do something all of its own, so apologies for the slight muck-up. Thank you. I've got some types on the screen. I'm going to find, how did those come in there? And can people see the blue?
It's probably just a weird bug on your laptop. Something with browser.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, that's going to get right in the way. Just 1 second. Let's try again. There you go. Hopefully that's sorted. So thank you so much. Over to the Community Management Working Group updates. There's a few points here that we'd like to bring you to attention. So the first is all these sessions, we have a weekly call on Tuesdays, 11 to 12. Normally we post it on Slack, but it's available on the website there, all the details. Please drop in and join if you can. I'll really welcome anyone with all thoughts. We normally progress all of the tasks and such like, but also very open to comments and thoughts. We also have all that details on our Slack or websites, details on the bottom there and on the slides that you'll get available from the website. Last quarter, we had our conference, and we had a bid that we were putting into the Skills Network call for funding, and we were going to be the TRE Net Plus. Manchester kindly volunteered to lead. We developed a strong set of supports. Thanks for people on this call that offered us letters of support, and we worked to the line, but a decision from UKRI around the person who was going to be the principal investigator meant that the bid was not submitted. They said our PI was not suitable, which was a quite shock to us, but that was the result. What we've also been doing is encouraging consideration of the Day UK Interest Group Working Group sessions that were announced a little earlier on in the year. People will remember that. We, the Community Management Working Group, did not submit to be an interest group, mainly due to the fact that we couldn't find a lead institute that would take on the lead funding of it. We also supported others and offered the working group support, and SATRA moved forward with this as an interest group and has put a bid in. I think Simon will brief us a little more later on. Excuse me, but independently, we also helped support both the SATRA example, but also with Kate and Amy. I supported them a little bit in helping create a bid for the information governance interest group, which has been submitted. So those are things that we've done to support and extend the work of this community into more funding. We also were invited by the Office of National Statistics to go and take part in their research capability event that was held in London earlier on in November. And we were doing a session that, so you want to use data in a TRE ? And we talked to them about what the TRE did, how the community worked, and had a great interactive discussion about what a TRE is all about and some of the problems are relating to TREs. It turned out the audience wasn't a group of researchers, but a large group of TRE specialists within the ONS world. What we've also been doing is planning dates. So the agenda is looking solid for the next, but a little fluid, for the next year ahead. So advance notice. Lisa will be talking a little bit more, I think, a little later on the Funding and Sustainability Working Group. So hold the date, 28th of Jan next year, 11:30 till 1. There's a session from the Funding and Sustainability Working Group. First of all, it's summarising what it has found, because it's nearing the end of its work. And then we've got a guest speaker, Claire Pepper from the SDE network, talking about that topic. And also a session sort of prompting a question, what should that future look like? So I'll be giving a sort of provoking point just as a thing to get the discussion going. There's also events planned for March and June, our quarterly meetings. The March one will hopefully be on information governance and pick up the activities that are underway that were just mentioned. And then the June event will hopefully pick up the funding and sustainability story again, following the January the 28th session, depending if that's what people think is of interest and we move forward with a bigger, different agenda. And the final one is in September. We have our annual conference. This time, who knows, we may be arranging it with others like the ESTAP community, that is one of our sister communities represented on this call, and who knows, maybe others, if depending on how they develop with the various bids and such like, a hybrid conference in September. So that's what the community management working group has been up to. We're now going to quickly have a little sojourn into the information governance work stream. And I think Amy's going to tell us, Amy Tilbrook's going to tell us a little bit more about what that work was all about. Amy?
Hello. In September and previously in this group, we've asked if anyone's actually interested in some kind of information governance working group and what it might need to do. But unfortunately, there wasn't many people who were able kind of to step up and chair it. I think there was definite interest in it, but not quite a specification of what it wanted to do. So since then, Kate O'Sullivan has been the driving force. Said, you know, there's this money from Dare UK, could we be an interest group? So I and Pete and Felix put out a call on the UK TRE community, our mailing list, and lots of people responded, and we are very grateful because that really pushed the fact that there is definite interest in supporting information governance professionals kind of in this area, and how we can make this better. We do plan for this, so we put in a bid to Dare UK. We should hear about it in the next couple of weeks or so. And we do plan for it to be, I've put inextricable instead of inextricably, that's irritating, to be part of the UK TRE community. We really like the grassroots structure and the frameworks that you've got going. So we'll be borrowing heavily, shall we say, from how this group has been run to bring together people to talk about the specific issues that are of interest to us. If the bid isn't as successful, then at least we've definitely got an interest, and because we had to draft a charter for it, we've got something that we can develop into a UK TRE working group, and move towards more tangible outcomes. Now, we did put in a bid as a interest group, not as a working group, because there were lots of different ideas for different tangible outcomes that we could have. So we thought it would be better to do an interest thing and bring together people to have a space where we can, similarly to the UK TRE community, debate the things that are actually of interest to the community. So the top one is around the fact that there are already groups out there. We know there are information governance groups out there, but there are and we know there's lots of people in this community that are part of them, but they are potentially domain orientated, or they might be not necessarily, they might be broad information governance rather than specific to TRE work. So we'd like to pull together the information from those different groups into one place where we can all discuss them. And bring together, operational advice, good practice. This is about stuff on the ground, actually making governance work, rather than just being told over and over again to streamline it and then being brought in a new regulation. And we're really keen to do this because we're very aware that there's a wider program of federated stuff going on. So we can't really do federated approaches without having kind of federated governance. So those were our three kind of main aims. And our next plan is we need to have a lay co-chair, so we need to recruit them. We've got some ideas of how to do this, and we want to make it kind of a fairly open process. And we do plan, as I say, we're planning to integrate pretty heavily with this community. So maybe piggybacking or joining the horses in relation to a conference in September, where that has been built into the bid. We're going to be finding a web presence, and we've got some admin built into the costing there. And we do want to do some PPIE stuff about specific governance type questions. The PPIE work that has been involved in so far have been, we've had lots of broad brush strokes, and I think that's really good. And the public have been really involved in how TRE should develop. But sometimes people have specific questions that you need a public opinion on. So we're planning some workshops there. And that is our timeline. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but there is one. We have a plan. Kate is very good at planning. And I think the last thing I really want to say is thank you to everyone who's already kind of contributed or shown interest. And we've had lots of different organizations involved, which just goes to show how kind of broad the TRE and information governance community is. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks so much, Amy. So we're going to now move into working group updates. There will be time just before the tea to get a contribution from anyone or a question set, and we can go back to any of these slides. So I can hold here if anyone has put up their hand, Cass at all, or may ask any questions in the chats that we need to bring forward.
No hands or questions just yet.
Cool. So we'll move on. Working group updates. We always do one of
Oh,
these.
Pete spoke too soon. We prompted
Oh.
someone. There's a question for Amy in the chat. Amy, what skills and background or experience do you want in the lay chair?
That is a great question, which is something we haven't fully worked out yet. The thing that we really wanted it to be, you know what? I'm not going to go into it. That is something that we will work out, but thank you for the question. And we'll
Brilliant.
put it out, if we can put it out on the UKTR, the what's it called? The mailing list for this community, then we will.
Well answered. It has been discussed. So thank you. Working group updates. We have 7. These are them. And I thought we'd go through from top to tail, giving an update. First of all, is there anyone from the glossary community working group, Rob or Valent? I don't know if Kate's on the call, who would like to give a quick update?
I think I'm not sure Kate's on the call. I can see Rob, but maybe I'll just give a quick update on what we've been up to. We meet fortnightly, so there's Rob. And so we have essentially a sort of pre-publication or version 0 of the glossary, which is basically a mix of a glossary from the Dare UK driver projects and the HDR UK data mined glossaries. They've got very, very little overlap in terms. And so what we've mostly been doing over the past few months is going through that, identifying any things that are obviously missing from that collection of terms. Sensitive data was one that we noticed early on wasn't there, and going through a bit of an editorial and curation process on those terms. We're also aware of other resources that are out there, so there are things like the co-data, research data management, term base, and there's also the dictionary of privacy, data protection and information security. So we're linking to definitions that are there where it makes sense to, but we're looking to have a version 1 ready to show everyone, ideally, hopefully in the first quarter of 2025. So hopefully people will be able to get to have a look at something and to provide feedback, etc. But the group is open to anyone to join. Like I say, we meet fortnightly. We have a mailing list. I don't know if Rob can drop a link maybe into details on how to join that. But yeah, happy to take any questions. Rob, is there anything else that I've missed?
I don't think so, Ballant. I dropped a link to the glossary V0 into the chat, and the last set of minutes I could lay my hands on from the 11th of November. I think I missed one that might have been more recent, but that has links to the working group charter, which tells you how to get involved, and the code of conduct, which is a thinly disguised copy of the UK TRE code of conduct. No surprises there. And again, a link to the spreadsheet, and shows you kind of where we're up to and kind of what we've, how far we've been able to get. As Valent says, we've got a way of working and we are progressing. It's great fun. Come and join us. Really, glossaries. What is not to like?
Brilliant job. Thank you very much, Rob and Valent. Cybersecurity risks. Donald or Martin, are you either of you on the call and can give us an update? I'm going to assume that that's a no. So we can come back if they are, and it's just buttons and all those things. Sartre, Simon, are you giving an update on Sartre?
Yeah, I'll give an update. So as everyone probably knows, if you're interested in Sartre, you know that work's been fairly quiet recently. Unfortunately, that's just due to us not having time and too many other things going on. The good news is we've got a couple of grants in. So the big one is that we've put in a grant as part for DARE Phase 2 as part of a large consortium involving most of the other DARE Phase 1B projects. That's a massive grant. The Sartre component of that will mostly be looking at things like sort of federation and automated disclosure control. So things like how could Sartre potentially be extended to support federation, because that's obviously a major driver these days. And also this and sort of automated disclosure control. Just to emphasize, although this bid is focused on federation, we're going to follow the same processes we did originally, where everything has to be done through the community. So if we do come up with any ideas of federation and how they could fit into Sartre, we won't put those straight in. We'll write them up, we'll present it to everyone as always, gather feedback. We're planning to hold collaboration cafes throughout as previously. And we're also going to try and look at other ways that people can contribute. The second bit we put in is as an interest group to the Dare Communities Fund. As part of that, we're going to add some additional co-chairs who aren't currently listed on this list. The main focus of that interest group, if we get funded, is on the sort of long-term sustainability of Sartre. So we went for an interest group because this is very much a long-term thing. You can't build sustainability overnight. The sort of things we'll be looking at is like, what's the best long-term governance model for Sartre? And so linked with that is the idea of accreditation. So a lot of people have asked for Sartre to be a formal accreditation, but we need to look at, well, what does that actually mean though? What does it look like? And more importantly, what does the community want? Like, is there even agreement across the whole community and consensus about what accreditation should be? So because these are long-term problems, we don't not like to come up with a solution in the time frame of the interest group funding. But what we do hope to do is to gather input and write up at least an intermediate report where we say this is what the community thinks, and that will put us in good stead then for some follow-up work. Right. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Simon. Great. Funding and sustainability. Is Lisa on the call?
Hi. So we set up this working group in around April time, I think, this year. And we had really one job to do, and that was to try and gather as much information as we could via a survey on the costs of running a trusted research environment, and the type of funding that people get in order to make their systems sustainable, and also the types of things that they charge for, really, so that we could gather that information and then share it out amongst the community. We did that survey this summer, and I suppose one of the main surprising things were that actually there's quite a lot of funding coming in, but it's nearly all academic rather than commercial. And so since probably August time, we've been looking at ways of finding out more about how we can attract commercial income into our trusted research environments. And to that end, Claire Pepper from NHS England has kindly agreed to come talk to the network, to the community rather, about the new subnational SDE commercial strategy that they are building. They're going to have standard costing models for SDEs, and we thought that might be of interest to the other people outside the NHS. As well as that, Pete's kindly come on board as a co-chair and will be speaking at an event in January that we've set up in order to hear from Claire as well, and I'll just be wrapping up just showing the full results of the survey as well. So I hope you can make it, and I expect an invite will come out very soon for that.
Thanks, Lisa. Indeed. Hello. Let's go just back to this list. The SD and TRE definitions in the extended control. Madeline may be on the call and can give an update on one, or I will. And the Citizens Agency won't have an update because that's what the whole of this rest of this event is for, but we'll cover a little bit in a minute. So thank you very much, Lisa. The summary of the SD TRE definitions, Madeline, are you on the call? Would you like to talk to this, or?
I am. I can. Yeah. So thank you very much, Pete. So the SDE TRE definitions piece, if depending on how up to date you are. So the last update here is essentially that we think we have reached a satisfactory point with where we wanted the working group to go, what we wanted it to achieve. And that was essentially sussing out the differences between SDE and TRE, and also the similarities between SDE and TRE, and what do these terms really mean? Are they interchangeable? What kind of connotations do people have? And then diving into the various elements of these environments. So ultimately breaking it down into research zones and data zones. And there was, in general, a lot of agreement, and through conversations, we were able to figure out where the points of disagreement kind of anchored, and then modified the language a bit into this zone-focused language rather than SDE and TRE in their kind of entirety. And so from that point, taking it forward will be through, through the SATRA working group and the glossary working group to kind of embed that new understanding into the standardized architecture and also the glossary, so that we can kind of continue to carry that learning with us. Does that do it, Pete?
Thank you so much. Yes, indeed. The only thing I would add at the bottom is how the information governance models would work across those two different zones. At the moment, most inverted commas TREs are the two zones combined, and therefore IG is sort of knocked in the middle and locked in the middle. But thank you so much. So we're going to start describing the work we've done in a more formal report as we can, to finish sometime in the end of probably next quarter of 2025, with the view of, so where does this go onwards through those other working groups, and combining co-working with them. So we better get our skates on, Rob and Ballant, if we need to get this stuff into the first version of things that are going to be around the same sort of time. So Madeline and I and others might need to pick up our game. So the last one is the extending control working group, and that's all about the picture of if we've got a data zone and a research zone, how does the data zone reach across to the research zone and keep control in the information governance senses of the word, through to that point of where the research is done on the data that is in the data zone. So this has been sitting largely in abeyance for a wee while. With the development of the information governance working group, I think it's now the right sort of time to pick this up, especially with a potential a quarterly meeting on information governance coming in March, working with Amy and Kate. So we'll see how that evolves, but the progress to this is still the same. We have drafted a request for input type document, and we've listed a few recipients of that through the technology players, the TRE platform providers, and today, and the projects that have looked at this sort of world and said, okay, well, what do you all think? How do you do it? What's your model of this sort of approach? And see where we get to. I think that's where we still plan to go in order to complete its work. And hopefully that will be done in the next quarter to start, so that we'll be able to overlap that with the emerging information governance approach in a federated world. So before we break we're nicely on time. We've got at least 20 minutes before we are supposed to finish. First of all, are there any questions from any of all of that? And then any observations? And also, if you have something you want to update the community, now is a great time to do it. Just put your hand up, request on it, and we'll you can update anything about anything to the rest of the community. Oh, sorry. Rob.
Sorry, I couldn't resist asking this somewhat cheeky question. So the zone terminology, as you might know, I'm a fan of that. But have you settled on what thing these are zones? Yeah, a zone is usually a zone of something. What's the thing?
Yes.
Sorry.
No, great question. In the survey, it articulates the sorts of things that are in the data zone and the sorts of things that are in the research zone. So that's for everyone, on all of us. We could go to that link and make our own thoughts. Now, like in all things, Rob, like your own glossary work, we've had to struggle with, no, you haven't struggled, but we have struggled with using English words to convey a meaning.
So have we.
And in this whole world, everyone can get a word or not a word or whatever. So it's quite a difficult thing. But our line of attack has been, if we get people out there with boxes where they can sort of say, I found this problem, or this worked for me or didn't work for me, we'll uncover that. So yes, we have tried to say, well, what do we mean by data zone? What's the sort of things that a data zone would have under its control or take within its responsibility or be master of? And what would be a research zone? So those are an attempt in the survey. Having said that, it's not a definitive yes or no. One of the reasons why we're very keen to talk to you and also the SATRA team is to work through as a community a language set that is more understood, because the general feedback from the wider community has been, yeah, we understand what you're saying. We're all slightly overlapped, or not black and white. Everyone's on the same page in all senses. There's a bit of movement in the middle. So yes, the more we can have that discussion. The one thing I think it came across for me most was there is this difference between what a research zone would involve in terms of some of the technology sets, as opposed to the data zone with some of the technology sets. And from a funding point of view, one of my observations is your scaling of your data zone is driven by the input volumes coming in per day. It's the size of data. Whereas the research zone, it's based on the complexity of the analysis and the complexity of the compute that you need and the scaling of the compute that you need in the research zone. And those are totally different things, driven by different things with different needs and such like. So if you were one entity, you would have to do both. But if we have two entities, one can scale itself based on known research demand and one can scale itself based on known data growth, that sort of thing. So yeah, these are more, we treated these things as maybe organizational boundaries as much as technology boundaries, as much as conceptual boundaries in the zones. Definitely, great question.
I think those are all in the mix, Pete, absolutely. There's real traction in the two groups, if not some wider community, getting together once we've got to a position and saying, right, we're going to jam this together and we're going to, table it for the country. We may not be too far away from that.
No, I feel that's Anthony. Please.
Sorry, just coming off mute. Can you give us a real life example of these two areas? Because I'm a little bit fuzzy on, a real life example of like a supermarket or a bank, or can you give me a real life example? Because I'm a bit lost.
You mean the data zones and the research zones, or?
Yeah, the data zone and the research zone. Can you give me a real life example just so I can picture it, please?
Yes, certainly. So an example of a research zone might be the Crick's TRE or the Turing's TRE, where those are popping up because they're related to a specific project, Anthony. So let's say there's a project on understanding I'm going to make this bit up, the effect of environmental pollution on the growth or not growth of asthma type diseases. And that is a specific project which may be bringing data from the NERC, so the National Environmental Research Council, from the Biomedical Research Council, from the world of genetics or pathology or hospitals, all of which are their own special research data TRE type object. but the data has to be all put into one special research zone in order for that data to be merged and melded and analyzed in a sensible way. Does that make sense? So you can't go to the data, you have to take the data to the project. So that's an example where both the Turing and others, the Crick's approach to TREs is one around project-specific TREs, not data-orientated TREs. For the sake of using the old language, Anthony, does that help?
Yeah, so it's a bit like linking the data together so that you can search it and work the data to find your answers. And it's where you link all that data together is how I understand it. And whether you move the data to a particular spot or whether you somehow do a amazing technology link to all the places where the data is and query it that way. Am I on the right page?
You are exactly on the right page, Anthony. And the extending control working group, that was the last one that I talked about, is what technologies allow that latter part. Can you allow the data to largely live where it was under the control of the data controllers of that data?
Yeah.
And allow the processings to still work? And how do you do that? So the likes of Teleport, the likes of TrefX, etc., these projects were early attempts to try and work out how technically that could be done, like federated analysis and things like that, or other techniques that can do that in a sort of academic science type way. They're not just academics, but yes, exactly that, Anthony.
Thank you. I was involved in a couple of those projects, so I now totally get it. So thank you very much indeed.
Great question. Any other thoughts or observations from the great fab folk on any of the questions? Any updates people would like to give, what their own areas been up to that they wish to share, or any events that are coming up that they'd like to highlight and publicize to this group? If no one else has, I would certainly like, I believe it's the, oh gosh, I'm going to possibly get my dates wrong. I think it's the 10th of December. It might be the 11th, where the SDAP community have got their next meeting.
Yes, so I'm so sorry, Pete. I was trying to find my hand and I could not. And I didn't want to just cut in. So yeah, we do have our SDAP meeting next Tuesday in the morning. So please do let us know if you'd like to attend. I'm desperately now trying to think of what we have on the agenda. I know that Pete is kindly doing a session for us, and we also have a session from Felix Ritchie, where I'm working at home. I've got a split screen. It's going to take me a while to log back into my other one to give you the agenda, but I can link it in the chat. But yeah, if anybody isn't a member of the SDAP community and would like to join, do get in touch and we can give you the details.
Thanks so much, Lee. That's great. What we should say in terms of, just to keep people, both the SDAP community and the UK TRE community, we have part of the other work that the the community management working group does, is we have regular catch-ups between the two communities to look at our future plans, dates, and all of those alignment things. So just so people are aware that we're not working in an isolation. If there are no other questions, we are doing very well for time, which is excellent news. We don't have to rush. What I'd love to suggest is we move forward with the agenda and just take that as extra time at the end of the day or whatever. So would people be comfortable going for a break now? Could I say, instead of 14:40 back, could we do 14:30? Hopefully everyone managed to get themselves a nice little warm cup of something or whatever their predilection is. So, great to see you, Tudor.
Good to see everyone, to be here.
So we'll give everyone a little minute or two to come back. I would love to say, anyone not here, please raise their hand. That would be a good thing to say, wouldn't it? So we said past. I'll give it a couple of minutes. We don't want to rush people too much. We'll leave it till 32 if that's all right, and then we'll crack on. Everyone's busy days. Right. Well, I think we should crack on. So thank you so much. Now we're going into the main part of this afternoon session, looking at the role of the public within TREs and around the TRE type world. Let's introduce this maybe in twofold. First of all, where did this come from? The citizen agency working group within our community is looking at this. On the right-hand side, you can see a picture of the data zone on the left and the research zone on the right. And what we were talking about in the Q&As was sort of, there becomes now a citizen zone in the middle that would allow potentially the citizen to have more of an active agency within this domain. The ability to invoke consent to trigger the movement of data from left to right. The ability to visibly see what is being used about them and what outputs and results have come from that, from the research project. Potentially gaining more engagement in the whole process and through observation and action and that sort of agency, some more trust or something earned. Maybe not using the right words, but the community we've gathered together is going to address this whole area. But before we do that, I was struggling personally to understand what involvement and engagement means with the public. So I had to sort of, with my little way, trying to think, okay, all of the places in the real world that relates to. So here is a project collaborating with principal investigators and researchers, and they are using data which is under some sort of permission framework, be it sort of population section 251 type consent permission, or some sort of consensual agreement from the individuals involved in the project, the actual people, the actual humans, citizens, public. So that project might have a focus that relates to an interest group, that might have some sort of public engagement and involvement type viewpoint, or the organizations that they work from may have some sort of citizen-like panel, which again has some sort of public involvement and engagement capability connected to that, or that project has been through an ethics committee, which has some public involvement and engagement activity on. or the data they're getting is through some sort of data access committee or confidential advisory group or some sort of independent information access group type body, which has a public informed and engagement viewpoint as part of it, or via a controller or a library that has a panel relating to it, and therefore it has that voice, that observation, or it's built on a foundation or an expectation model that's come from some sort of deliberative work that itself has some public involvement engagement. Or finally, the people themselves have given consent for their activity, their data to be involved, and therefore that's how they've also collected the public involvement and engagement viewpoint of the people actually actively engaged in the project and helping the project. So with that as a basis, I see Anthony has raised hand, so please fire away again. Anthony, no problems.
Sorry, just time lag, and I've got pugs in the room that might bark. Yeah, this is a very academic model. And actually, what I like to see is patients and the public at the very heart of the project. So on the project team, there needs to be a member of the public, or at least two members of the public, really, because you don't just want one voice there. But the project needs to be held to account, and that member of the public acts as a critical friend, equal member of the project team, attends all the meetings, because having outside input is several steps away from the actual project team. And what I've done on previous projects is, so for example, the Alleviate data hub in Dundee, which is a TRE of its own. I'm a co-applicant on that. And then I had a less experienced lay member of the public and patient work with me. So I'm sort of supporting them to learn what I do. And then we created a group of 6 people who had never been involved in research before. So they weren't what happens often in academic healthcare research, where you kind of get white, middle-class, educated, retired people who can afford to do it. We actually paid these people quite well so that they could take a day off a month to actually work in it. And then what we did was we set up an online group using MailChimp. And we've now got a wider group of 1,000 people, around 1,000 people. Go ahead, Pete.
No, this is great. Could I ask you to hold all of this? Because that's the whole point of this whole session, Anthony, is to get that out. So this is, as you say, quite rightly say, this is a very academic picture, not complete. I'm just raising it as a way of not meaning to bias or anything like that. That's not what I'm trying to do at all. I'm just trying to introduce for the widest community. So you're absolutely right, and I love what you're saying. Couldn't agree with you more. Could we hold all of that for the discussion? Oh, wonderful, thank you. Because I think that hopefully this will also come up. I want to lower my hand, but there we go. Thank you. Is that okay, Anthony? Thank you. Really great to have your input there. Thank you. I really encourage that. Thank you. So this was by way of introduction. This is by far not the answer. It's totally not the answer. It was trying to explain there's loads of places where public engagement and involvement could occur. And part of the challenge is, how do we all describe it in a way that we know which parts of this possible suite this is and what role any one person is playing? Because, as you said, someone active in the project, like you described, or people who have actively wished their data to be shared with this project or given to the project, is very different from maybe an arm's length academic review of the project back in a panel on a DAC or a ethics committee or some voice like that. They're very different. So the format of this session was the first hour for us to talk about this through the voice of some experts. So there's 5 people who may speak, who are going to tell us about their viewpoint on this particular forming question. in a federated world, what do they think needs to be in place for the public to become central to the creation of a step change in UK research capability if we're going down this route? And we love your thoughts, ideas, and questions, just like Anthony has provided to us. We want more of that. And if we could ask you to use the Q&A part of the screen at the bottom, when you lower down to do that, if you could use that, prepare it in advance if you like, or use that Q&A button to already prepare a question into the debate, prompted by what you have said. You've heard rather. And then in the second session, what we'd like to do as a trial is for the first 20 minutes or so, we would love the panel to just listen. So we'd love your thoughts. They do not have to be questions. They do not have to be points of anything. They could just be any observation that you think is important for us to get. If we can keep it expansive enough to understand, but not too elaborate, that'd be great to get as much content from the audience on this call as possible. We'll then have the ability for the 4 or 5 speakers to maybe share back their reflections on what they've just heard. And then we can open a normal Q&A type discussion, any sort of dialogue. It doesn't have to be questions, it can be comments, anything before we close. And I'll try and facilitate that if that's okay. So you can see the people and spot them in the big set of people's names and such like, the faces on the cards. Tudor is going to talk to us a bit about his personal view. That's the voice of a patient, inverted commas, or a member of the public. Sadie Mahill from Imperial College Health Partners is going to give a viewpoint of the collaborative work done using deliberative studies across London. Samira, who is from PEDRI and within the HDI UK world, and I think I'm going to get it wrong, BHF, is going to give us a view of the good practice that PEDRI provide. And Kerry and Chris from Use My Data are going to sort of close the session with, again, a viewpoint of the patients around the world. And that's our schedule. It'll go in that order. And if, again, we could keep questions in the Q&A or quick points in the Q&A, and we'll go through and then have a time later on to raise all these and discuss them, if that's okay. So first of all, over to you, Tudor. Tell me when you want me to move your slides along, and I'll just do the clicking, Tudor, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction, putting a context on this afternoon session. So yeah, my presentation will be one point of view from the public, mostly as a patient in health data research. Slide, thank you. So my presentation will, I'll speak a little bit about myself, my background, how a public voice can have an impact in research, where TREs fit in a patient journey, or in some patient journeys, and what are some opportunities where TREs can meet public needs, possibly soon, or low-hanging fruit type of approach. Thank you. Next slide. Oh, I have a few animations involved. Thank you. So yeah, even though I work in health, my journey in public involvement started as a patient. It was about 5 years ago. I was diagnosed with Crohn's, and even though it was a period of a few months where tests happened, I only had a few minutes with the doctor. So I was left wanting a lot more information. I was left needing more from the system as a whole. Press, please. Luckily, I was a student at the time at UCL, and an open day was organized very soon after my diagnosis. So I was able to join it, and I was able to attend presentations from researchers into my disease. I was able to meet other patients, and all of a sudden this uncertain time became more hopeful time. They also gave me the opportunity to join one of HDR's health hubs, so the gut reaction hub. And there I joined the patient committee, and this is a project that was meant to bring together data from the bioresource IBD registry and I think over 10 NHS trusts to build a longitudinal data set with DNA. So more in-depth studies could be made into this disease. This project lasted for 3 years, and then it was transferred to NIHR Bioresource. It managed to recruit more patients, so now there are over 45,000, going on 50,000, with detailed genetic data, clinically descriptive data, and unfortunately no GP data, because as some of you may know, those are much harder to get. So as you can see in this this flow of my patient journey, I went from a position of wanting more, of having unmet needs, click please, to a position where my needs were met. I had enough knowledge, and I had enough knowledge that I could help other patients similar to me. So what was the public involvement in this latter half? Next slide, please. So the gut reaction presented how the data will be brought together from all these various places and how it can be stored safely, which was a TRE, but it wasn't used like that from the beginning, the terminology. Yes, next slide, please. So the main impact we had, we introduced a way of reviewing research applications in this for this data set. And everything you see in green is something that was added to the existing review process. So the patient and public group was put at the center. Every application came through the public group, and this allowed the expert committees to have a public view of the application they review on top of the technical assessment. So this was considered a success. The public group carried on for over 2 years. And next click, please. And we have had several meetings, reviewed several applications, and now it is being integrated, or it has been integrated into the wider NIHR Bioresource. It's called the National Public Advisory Group, where patients in the public are assigned to research applications of their own interest. Right. So, next slide, please. So this is what could be referred to as a happy case study of my own. But many patients don't have this happy case study. It sounds weird to say lucky, but Crohn's is a disease that is fairly well known. There are 500,000 people with it. It has a name, first of all. It has plenty of research and plenty of genetic research behind it. So there was a place where I could get information. And also I was lucky to be next to an event an outreach event that could put me in touch with other people like me. Many patients don't have that at the beginning. And many patients have a vulnerable state that they have to navigate themselves in the beginning. So my first interaction with the TRE only came after I joined a patient committee, right? Click, please. So that's the area where the TREs exist. It's after we pass the vulnerable period, where we're on some sort of pathway within the health system, even if we're trialing the different treatments. And this is what I want to bring forward as an opportunity, because this was my journey. But if we were to generalize it a little bit, please click. It would look something like this. Someone gets diagnosed with a condition. It is a shocking, impactful moment. They feel lonely, misunderstood, invisible, uncertain. They need to seek help. This is a step that not every patient takes. So they need to seek this help and to reach to a position where they can meet others like them and become visible, become more hopeful, decrease that uncertainty. And in some cases, patients can carry on all the way to patient involvement. And I've put working treatment in the middle because throughout my experience, I have had fellow patients who had to pull out of patient and public involvement because their health was very poorly. So PPI requires a sort of a sustained interest and presence in there. And yeah, unfortunately, health held them back. So there are quite a few numbers there are some biases forming here, as you can see, over who can join, who ends up being in these situations. And what I want to highlight is that the most vulnerable people are at the beginning, at the diagnosing conditions, and they're only there for a set period. They don't linger there for long in unmet needs, unless science or evidence information is being brought to them. They will find other ways to meet their needs. Next slide, please. So what I want to encourage people who work with TREs is to find ways to recruit patients a bit earlier on. So double click, please. You may find people that can go all the way to patient involvement and another one. Click. But if you manage to get to people very early on, then that could be quite a big help. Because when I was in that position, all I wanted to know is that there are other people like me with this condition. I wanted to know how many there are, how many are my age, all these things that are almost very basic research questions. So that's how I know they can be answered within the TRE. So next slide, please. So these are the needs that the TRE could address quite early on, right? So to loneliness, it is very valuable to a patient to tell them that you are not alone, right? If someone gets diagnosed with some cardiac condition and you have a BHF TRE, a heart TRE, definitely there are other people like them, right? So being able to tell someone that there are others like them and how many of their age or their background, it is extremely valuable. If you can also put them in touch with those people, that's a whole nother level. So one more click, please. It's good to think of this as a data discovery tool, because for a researcher, that's what it is. You look through a data set to try to figure out what sort of studies you can do. But for a member of the public, this data discovery tool, it's a way to come out of vulnerability. Is a way to meet some of the needs that a disease may pose on a patient. And of course, from there, one more click, please. This can be built into something more involved, let's say, a route for people to engage with research, to help improve it, right? So from being able to find people like you, to being able to viewing your own data, or to viewing where your data is being used, or even to have some sort of input on your data, because I have had instances where my data was wrongly inputted in some systems. And I would have loved to say, no, this is wrong, but there's no means for me to raise that issue. There's a bit of reluctance from some institutions, perhaps for being held to account or something, but normally people get in here to help everyone in the health space. Yes. For my final slide, I will like to give an example. So far I kept things linear of how patients can move from unmet needs to met needs. And I'm going to add another dimension here of visibility, right? I gave the example of a condition that is known, Crohn's, can be diagnosed, but in some cases, many conditions are not known, right? So we had COVID just a few years ago, and we had patients with long COVID symptoms. They didn't know it was cold because it had no name at the time. They were fatigued. They had all sorts of symptoms that they could not explain. They could not find someone to label them. So they had to find each other, right? And they found each other through means of Facebook groups, websites, Twitter. I would say dangerously close to where misinformation also happens. So I'm sure we can do better in helping people find each other than in the public space. And it ended up being that over 2 million, almost 2 million people were reported with long COVID in the UK, right? And once they appeared on the radar, this entered into the streamed process of research and trying to address their needs, right? So I know there are many requirements coming to you, managing a TRE, many complex requirements from researchers. Every project is new in its own way. But there is a world sort of before that where a small deal of development can bring a lot of help to some people, and that's what I wanted to bring to this discussion. Yes, this is called the Rebel Health Matrix, and you can find more about it in Susanna Fox's book. I highly recommend it. It's a good read. Thank you very much, Pete, for the.
Thank you, Tudor. Thank you very much, Tudor. That's very kind of you to share all of that in your view and voice. Sadie.
Thank you, Pete, and thank you, Tudor. Hi, everyone. My name is Sadie. I'm a Senior Qualitative Insights and Engagement Manager at Imperial College Health Partners, who are the Health Innovation Network for North West London. And alongside Ipsos, we have done quite a lot of deliberative engagement in London around the use of health and care data, which I'm going to speak to you about this afternoon. Next slide, please, Pete. I guess just to start us off with, so what is deliberation? It's probably a term a few of you may have heard being used, but deliberation is very much a progressive form of engagement that involves the public and patients within a specific area in decision making around how their health and care data is used. And it brings together mini publics reflective of a broader population. So Ipsos specifically uses recruiters to ensure that there's a range of ages, genders, ethnicities, socioeconomic backgrounds, but also attitudes to data as well. So hearing those who are maybe more cautious about how their data is used, as well as those who are maybe more open to different types of data use as well. And it brings those people together for a sustained period of time, gives them an opportunity to hear differing views to their own, but also differing expert views as well, recognizing that there's lots of different avenues and channels some of these decisions can take. And it's really about airing those different views and understanding what matters most to the public and why. So what are their expectations? What are their red lines? And I guess to give an example, for example, access. There's lots of different access criteria we could put in place, which might give people more trust and confidence in those processes. But if you have too many, that can also delay research or restrict more novel research. So where's that kind of sweet spot that feels comfortable for the public, and why is it that way? So it really invites them into the conversation, enables them to grapple with some of those trade-offs and decisions, and gives really detailed expectations to decision makers. So it helps to build trust and confidence in the process and in how data is used. Next slide, please. I'll talk to this one very quickly. So this is the kind of different stages of kind of engagement and involvement, obviously moving up the spectrum. And deliberation very much sits in the kind of involved collaboration space. So it's about giving people meaningful and active voice in shaping those decisions, and ensuring that actually the outcomes of those processes are heard and put into practice. But it can also lead us up that kind of involvement scale as well to empowerment. So one of the key things we've heard through these deliberations is the importance of ongoing involvement of the public in things such as data access committees, oversight groups. So it very much leads and links to that empowerment space, but it falls within involvement and collaboration. Next slide, please. And these are generally kind of three principles of deliberation. So if you're thinking about a topic and whether it's appropriate for deliberation, these are kind of three general principles which are good to keep in mind. So the first one, there should be a degree of contention around the approach. And actually what we find particularly helpful for deliberation is airing different views and actually inviting different views around the table as well. So throughout the process, having oversight groups where you are, potentially having data controllers who are more cautious about how data might be used by trusted research environments versus those who are maybe more ambitious, and actually getting them to air those different views to each other, but also to the public as well, and getting them to grapple with some of the different options that are there. Secondly, there should be meaningful opportunities to influence the approach. So there should be jeopardy on the table. It should feel a bit nerve-wracking. There should be genuine decisions which are at stake throughout these processes as well, that you're actually inviting the public to have a say on. It should be meaningful, and the kind of parameters should be clearly outlined as well. So if there are any things that do need to be in place, just being transparent and open with the public about that, so that they know what's within scope and what they can meaningfully influence. And then thirdly, the debate should be one where the public can meaningfully engage at the issues at stake. And some people might think that data or trusted research environments are too complex a topic for the public, but actually I think the ongoing work that's taken place shows that that isn't the case. So Understanding Patient Data have got some really great resources to help explain some of these topics. And actually through deliberations, we use kind of information forming, so building up people's knowledge around what a trusted research environment is, some of the safeguards, so introducing them to the 5 safes, lots of time for them to air their questions, have those answered by experts, and using interactive methods to help people put some of this into life. So for example, reviewing fictional data requests and getting them to say, would they approve it? Would they not? What makes them feel nervous about it? How do they feel about different things? So getting them to kind of weigh it up in a real life context, or using fictional patient personas to encourage people to consider perspectives beyond their own. So for example, would they feel differently if they had a rare disease which was maybe dependent on research? Would that change their mind? So using different methods to help bring complex topics to life for the public. Next slide, please. And this slide very much speaks to the journey that London has been on. So it started off in 2020 with the OneLondon Citizen Summit, which brought together 100 members of the public. Then Discover Now, which is the HDR UK environment for North West London, did some specific local engagement to understand how that should be operating as a data environment. And then more recently, this has moved again to a kind of more pan-London view, recognising that London is now one of the sub-national data environments, thinking about some of the principles. So how did Londoners feel about moving from a more fragmented approach to potentially a pan-London data environment? How would that operate? What were some of the fundamentals they wanted to see in place there? How would they feel about different data environments sharing information? Where is that appropriate? So really helping to prepare for the secure data environment. And I think it's worth saying on this slide just how far London has come. So from 2020, when there wasn't a shared care record, now to being a secure data environment, and the role that public input has had in shaping some of those changes. So giving people confidence to move further and faster because they really understand public expectations and views around some of these things. Next slide, please. So this slide just speaks to some of the policy issues that through those deliberations we have been able to engage Londoners around. So access criteria models, what needs to be in place and why, some of those safeguards and controls. And again, does that vary depending on the type of data that's being looked at, the amount of data that's being explored? How do people feel about more novel kind of machine learning where you've got larger data sets being looked at? As I said, the level at which data is shared, stored and analysed. So how do people feel about moving from a kind of more fragmented approach to potentially having environments which are talking to each other and sharing information? And value exchange approaches. So recognising that to be sustainable, there are costs involved in running some of these research environments. So what are the public's expectations around kind of charging and commercialisation of that? What does that need to look like? How does it vary depending on who and the type of project? And these discussions have looked at a range of use cases. So use of data for direct care through to research planning and improvement, but also different users of that data as well. So NHS, academia, charity, but also industry. And again, exploring how the public's expectations vary in different scenarios. Next slide, please. In this slide, just a few examples really of some of the expectations which have come out, and I think have included this on a slide mostly just to show you know, the granularity of expectations that do come out from these conversations. And I think there's some broad kind of overarching themes that we hear consistently. So firstly, the public really wanting there to be greater awareness and understanding of how and why their data is used in different ways, and transparency around the national data opt-out. And I think one of the things we consistently hear is actually the public is supportive of us using their data, both for direct care, but also for research and planning as well. It's just about that information, knowing how it's used, but actually when you talk to them about some of the safeguards and controls which are in place to protect that data, there is high levels of support for data being used for public benefit, but also for patient benefit as well. You can see there some of the commercial sides, so different tiered pricing models depending on the type of organisation, but also recognising different projects, so wanting to support projects that might save the NHS money or improve patient care, so considering the type of project as well. There was support for kind of linking up data between environments where there are consistent safeguards and controls in place. And I think that's really important because it shows the importance of being aware of some of the findings that have come out of these deliberations and similar ones, so that we can make sure that there is that kind of consistent oversight across trusted research environments. And then some of their red lines as well. So we talked about different types of data being shared. And actually the linking of health and police data was seen as particularly contentious. Similar concerns were raised around linking health and social care data as well. So understanding some of people's nervousness there and what could be done around that. And also red lines. So we heard often when you kind of opened it up to public questions, people worried about insurance or marketing. So just setting that as a red line and letting people know that actually that's something that would never happen. And actually that research will always be in the public interest and that there are safeguards and controls in place to ensure that. So this is just a flavour of lots of expectations which have come out from the deliberations, but I think it kind of stands to show that actually these topics, they might seem complex, but there is a space for the public in inputting and shaping some of these big decisions around how trusted research environments are working, and hopefully we can kind of share the learning. I know that National are now doing a bigger piece of work looking at the secure data environments and kind of consistency across all of them, which will be exciting to see the outputs from. But yeah, I will stop there and thank you, Pete.
Thank you so much, Sadie, for that on deliberation and how it has helped London see what its expectations are and how they could support federated worlds. Thank you so much. Samira, could I ask you to talk to your topic?
Absolutely. Thank you, Pete. Hi, everyone. So Smira Khan, as Pete mentioned, I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager for PEDRI. So we have nothing to do with the footballer PEDRI. We are the Public Engagement Data Research Initiative, and I'll talk to you today about the good practice standards. Next slide, please. Before I begin and delve into the good practice standards, I thought it'd be useful just to give you an idea and some background around PEDRI for those of you that may not have heard about us. So we were founded by ADR UK, which is Administrative Data Research UK, DARE UK, Health Data Research UK, and the Office for National Statistics a few years ago. And we are a sector-wide partnership, so we work across the data-driven research ecosystem, and we are very much data agnostic, so we focus on health, administrative, and statistical data as well. And more recently, we've been working to collaborate more with industry as well to be able to learn from them. If you just click, you can see that we've been working with ABPI and IQVIA, and we've also been working with patient organisations, including Use My Data that are here today, who sit on our governance boards, understanding patient data. We also work with NCCPE and Patient Voices and several other patient organisations as well. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to very briefly go over the aims of PEDRI and the sort of key focuses for our work. So the first is around partnerships and collaborations. So PEDRI aims to convene collaborations and partnerships, so working collaboratively to avoid duplication of effort and really increase efficiency in the space of patient involvement and engagement across data and statistics. So we know that there's hundreds of organisations that are working in data, and there's quite a lot of duplication of effort, and often the principles when it comes to patient involvement and engagement are the same. So we try to come together to kind of share resources, share best practice, and learn from each other as well. And one of the things that we have been focusing on in the last few months is trying to kind of enhance partnerships with non-health organisations as well. So that's kind of our key priority at the moment. Another area of work is around the community needs. So we've been exploring the community needs, so looking at kind of the challenges that we have around PPIE and data and statistics, and collectively trying to come up with solutions based around those. So one of the pieces of work that we've done around that is developing a resource hub on our website, which is very much focused on resources that are relevant to PPIE in data and statistics. And this came from a survey that we developed to kind of understand the community needs. And although there were several resources out there that were available to help for people, depending on which kind of, if they were on the really early stages of their journey for involvement and engagement, or they'd done quite a lot of PPIE, there were several resources, but there was kind of no one place to be able to find those. So we've now created a resource hub, which includes that. And we have a dedicated work stream that looks at learning and development, so really exploring the challenges. We also have an area of work around communications and engagement. So great to hear about Sadie's work around the deliberations. PEDRI also hosted a Data Saves Live campaign a few years ago, focusing on young families. So we were trying to kind of identify the knowledge gaps and really learn from what the public thought about data and their perceptions on that, which was really good. And also in the pipeline, we have several discussions with the Office for National Statistics and others around potential campaigns in the future. We've also been learning from NHS's national deliberations as well, and the work that they've been doing. So avoiding duplication and making sure that we actually learn from what's already happening as well. And then our kind of final area of work is around the best practices for PPIE in data and statistics. And this is where our good practice standards sit. And this is very much about establishing and advancing good practices for public involvement and engagement with data research to ensure that data is actually managed and used in ways that demonstrates trustworthiness and builds public confidence as well. Next slide, please. So what are we addressing? What is the point of developing some good practice standards? So we developed the actual standards with an aim to advance good practices, as I said, in data and statistics. And what we wanted to achieve through these was making sure that we are transparent and that organisations can demonstrate trustworthiness. I've seen there's been quite a lot of conversation in the chat around the word of trust and trustworthiness, which is really, really interesting. But one of the things is the key focus that we wanted to look at was the fact that there's confidential information that we're dealing with here. You know, the public sector contains confidential information about people, which makes it really important that we are handling it with care. And then really understanding the data process. You know, we know from the public that they know that their data is being used, but they don't understand the context that it's being used in. So really being open and transparent about the process is really key as well. The other area is around transparency and the importance of transparency, because the public don't actually fully understand how their data is being used, and data organisations need to be open, transparent, and hold ourselves accountable to the highest standards as well. But also important to note here that we're talking about transparency rather than transparent. I was in a conference last week where these terms were being used together, and there was pushback from the public around the fact, hang on, are you being transparent about my data? Are you sharing my data with everybody, kind of thing. So I think there's something around data literacy and data around that as well. And then data for public good as well. So our goal is to use data in ways that benefits everyone, especially in research and statistics, which absolutely relies on trust and contribution of the public as well. And then the final thing was really about listening to the public. So, you know, including the voices of those who are sharing their data. So we've already talked about, Tudor talked about the importance of patient and public involvement. And I think from the discussion and the icebreaker at the beginning, it was clear that we want them to be involved right from inception, from the very beginning through to dissemination engagement. So really, really important to listen to the public and understand their perceptions as well. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to kind of touch on the journey of the development of the standards. So it's been quite a journey. Initially, we started off with thinking about establishing the actual need of the standards. So we knew that we had UK standards for public involvement and engagement, but these were not specific to data and statistics. So we had a focus group where we brought together several organizations, data custodians. Some of you who are here today were probably involved in that. And we had a really good discussion around the need and whether there was a requirement for a set of different standards that were focused on data and statistics. And that was clarified. And from that, we did a thematic analysis, and we established a working group, which included NHS England, ADR UK, ONS, CR UK, DARE UK, and the BHF Data Science Centre, and of course, members of the public as well. And from that, we created these draft set of standards. At the time, we called them the best practice standards, and we published these. And if you could just click again and repeat, we published these, and then we did a public consultation to follow this in 2023. And this was very much about validation and making sure that these actually worked for people and people understood these. So we did the survey, and then after the survey, we further refined the standards, and we published the second version of the standards in July this year. After that publication, we did some further consultations with professionals, data custodians, and the public as well. And this was very much about kind of exploring the effectiveness and the relevance of the standards in practice. So how would they actually work, and how would organizations adopt these? So these were the kind of questions that we were exploring. And I'm really pleased to say that we had some really great feedback. And one of the feedback was that actually these are not the best practice standards, and we shouldn't call them the best. And this is why we changed it from best practice to good practice, because there's always room for improvement. And this was feedback from some of our public contributors that, you know, there's always room for improvement. There may be things that need to change. So I think we should call them the good practice standards. And that's exactly what we did. So the final version of the standards is now on our website, and what we hope to do is share the publication and the journey, and we're also hoping to add to the evidence base by reaching out to a journal as well around that, and providing kind of examples of best practice as well in adopting the standards. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this is the final version of the standards, and you can find these on our website. And as I said, we'll have a more detailed version and a publication which will be released early next year. But it just kind of clearly kind of outlines the key areas that we need to focus on and the standards that we need to focus on. So I won't go into detail for each one, but I think just from the discussions that we've had so far and what I've heard so far, I think inclusion, equality, diversity is extremely important in federated data, and just thinking about trusted research environments as well. You know, federated data, we know, spans across different demographics, different sectors. So the standards can really guide organizations in ensuring that diverse voices are represented in decision making, especially in prioritizing which data to use, what research questions to address, etc. The other area I just wanted to touch on was data literacy and training and the importance of education. I think often people don't actually understand, so there's often knowledge gaps. So taking the time to be able to create resources or work with the public is really, really important. You know, we kind of advocate for accessible communication as well. So how data is being used, and applying this in the federated data systems can really help explain the benefits and the safeguards, I think, which are really, really important. And then, of course, transparency. We often involve, you know, sensitive data, which is held by multiple organizations. So engagement and transparency with the public and stakeholders can really help to build that trust, and ensuring that people feel that their data is being handled responsibly and ethically as well. And we do want to create this culture of public involvement and engagement within organizations. So making sure that we're thinking about it right from inception, we're involving the public in our governance structures, and we're involving them across the different areas. There's lots of things to think about, and there's lots of challenges as well that come with this. But I think it's really, really important that we start considering these for everything that we do, and making sure that we actually start to try and work with the public alongside them to be able to kind of educate, enhance, but also get them, you know, more involved and think about diversity. So we are considering the kind of target population for the projects as well, which is really, really crucial. And if you could just click, this is a quote from one of the public contributors that was at one of the consultations, and she said that it's not about getting people to trust you, because I think we cannot control trust, but we can control kind of demonstrating trustworthiness as organizations. And I think this is really, really crucial. And these standards can really help to demonstrate trustworthiness within organizations, because trust is very much built on, as you all know, honesty, integrity, and built over time. But if we can demonstrate trustworthiness as organizations, we're definitely on the right pathway. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what the standards could look like in practice, and the importance of kind of working together as well and creating this culture of public involvement and engagement. So when we talk about who, especially for federated data, we need to work collectively. So working with different organizations, there's something about trust within those organizations as well. So bringing people closer together. So this involves all stakeholders, the public, PPIE professionals, data scientists, researchers, managers, but also senior leaders and decision makers need to be part of this as well. And then effective communication. So, you know, this is where the standards come in. So meaningful engagement, keeping it real and honest, being open and transparent about our processes, including everyone as well, proactive transparency, accountable systems, really sticking to what you're saying. I think often, you know, PPIE, sometimes there's not huge changes that can be made within a trusted research environment or in a governance structure where they might be involved in, they might be contributing, and something may not have changed as a result of PPIE, which is absolutely fine. But being transparent about that, I think, is really crucial as well. Mutual benefit, you know, what motivates people to be involved? You know, why do they want to be involved? They're learning about how their data is being used, but what else motivates people? And we've heard from Tudor that, you know, it actually helped you kind of understand as well your disease, which was fantastic. So I think understanding that more is really, really important. And then data literacy and training as well, which is really, really crucial. And this was developed by somebody from the Northwest SD network as well. And they've started adopting these and using the standards as their benefit metrics for PPIE across their organizations, which is really great. Next slide, please. So this is just about what's next for the standards. So we've done lots of work in producing these. It's taken about 2 years to get to a stage where we are now, where we have the final version of the standards. The final version and the publication will also include examples of how they can be included and adopted into practice as well. But the next kind of steps is very much around optimizing adoption and making sure that people can adopt these and use them in practice. Also creating case studies around these, but we also want to be capturing the impact of these standards as well. So we do want to develop an evaluation tool to manage kind of OKRs and KPIs to understand how they're working in practice. And we know that there's always risks involved, and we know that there's, you know, lots of challenges, and we want to be able to learn from those challenges as well. So I think that's really important. And the other thing that we hope to do is create an accreditation system as well, so like a kite marking system, and that's something that we'd like to explore as well in the future. But yeah, so very much about optimizing adoption, and hopefully we plan a high visibility event to formally introduce the PEDRI standards as well, and that'll kind of feature keynote speakers and panel discussion. So we'll definitely keep everybody updated on that, and it'd be great to have some people who are here today represented there as well. And that's my final slide.
Thank you, Samara. Thank you. So last but by far means not least, use my data, Kerry and Chris.
I think I'll say a few words to start with, and then I'll let Kerry speak. Firstly, thank you for all your patience sitting through a bunch of slides this afternoon. We've only got a couple each, so we'll try and keep it short. What I'd like to think about at the end of this is sort of what we can do for you as a community. So first of all, if you've never heard of Use My Data, what is it? We describe ourselves as trusted voice in patient data. And if you just click the next slide, Pete. Oh, and again. This is the reason why. So it's the only independent patient movement in the UK which has its focus solely on the use of patient data. It's completely independent in that it doesn't have any hierarchy. We have no director, we have no chief exec. The patients are in charge. So in practical terms, we have two sets of members. Patients, relatives, and carers are one set of members, and are full members. I use the word patient as a shortcut to patients, relatives, and carers, but it means the same thing all the way through here. We also have associate members who are professionals. Anybody who's interested in using the voices of patients to help them in their work with a shared aim to make sure patient data is used to save lives. Part of the work we do is around advocacy and lobbying. So we bring our patient voices together to produce things like clear position statements. We promote responsible and accountable use of data, and we got a range of things like position statements and policy statements on our website that you're welcome to have a look at. The whole reason Use My Data was formed several years ago was on the back of care.data, which some of you will be old enough to remember, when data access for research just dried up. And it dried up because of a failed program of work nationally to pull data together nationally. And there were huge kickbacks in the media, and lots of people became very distrustful of what we were trying to do with national data, huge amounts of opt-outs, and researchers couldn't get access to data. And this came to a large conference I used to run with 600 people, 100 of those were patients, this was about cancer actually. And in that conference, lots of researchers were putting their hands up in front of a panel of the 4 chief medical officers of the UK, say, we can't do our work. And the patients were absolutely aghast about this. And we pulled them together in a room one side that afternoon and said, do you want to do something about this? And that's where Use My Data, the essence of Use My Data came from. It was patients who wanted to do something to break down the barriers, to understand the stigmas, and use their voices to highlight the benefits and break down some of the barriers. They don't want to throw away safeguards. In fact, lots of our members, several of our members rather, have chosen to opt out, not because they don't want data to be used, because they want to use their voices to make sure that when data is used, it's used properly, clearly, openly, and transparently. What we do is provide a balanced voice. That's where this phrase trusted voice and patient data comes from. So patients are in charge. There are 9 of those patients who form our executive group, and I basically do what they tell me to do. I work for them as their data advisor, and we've got a very small secretariat of 3 part-time people, and they do the same thing. They do what the patients want them to do in whatever areas, and if they say no, then we don't do it. So we try and provide a balance, bringing patient voices to a range of conversations, particularly tricky conversations where we can act as a critical friend. So organisations regularly come to us, some local, some regional, some national, with thorny problems that they're trying to think through. So before they go to a wider audience, they want to test it out with some people who know a bit more about data than the average member of the public. Because you couldn't really say, use my data is typical members of the public. This is an informed group who want to do something. So they're self-selected in a way. But that brings a benefit because we can use their voices to have that critical, that tricky conversation with organisations, either in an open space or in a closed space, whichever we prefer, to bring their voices to test out some of the difficulties, to test out some potential solutions. So that's something we do regularly. To enable our members to do that, we put on a range of support activities for them. So it is absolutely no use having a patient sit on a panel, chair a panel, sit in a group, coming to a meeting such as this and expecting them to play a full and active role if they know nothing about the subject. You know, I found it really hard to pick up some of the things that were said this morning, the acronyms. There's lots of acronyms, there's lots of different things out there, lots of groups. And I've worked in data for 40 years and I'm finding it tough. So as a patient, it's almost impossible to be an active member in a group such as this unless you've got some sort of backup. So the practical thing we do is we provide either one-to-one mentoring for them or training or regular learning sessions, education sessions, which run once every 3-ish weeks on a Friday for an hour on a topic which they want to have run on. Well, we've got this Friday's actually on open source software because a few of them are coming up against this term open source software and said, Chris, what does it mean? Let's put on a session to our members with that knowledge. So we try and give them the information, their knowledge they need to be more active in whatever role they want to play out there. Could you click the next slide, please, Pete? Sorry, I'm trying to click myself here. Some basic principles for, I'll let Kerry speak. Sorry, Kerry, you know me, I talk a lot. Some of these things have been emphasized before. So language and communication is really important. We would say things like words like federation, it's used a lot. Trusted, the word trusted was used earlier on. Trusted research environments, secure data environments, federated data platforms. As a member of the public, it's a nightmare to try and understand how these things fit together. It makes absolutely no sense. If you're interested, we did an education session on exactly that. FDP, SDE, TRE, what do they all mean? Because that's what people wanted to know. They don't want the detail, but they want enough to be able to have a conversation in a meeting such as this. The other one was around transparency. We've heard the transparency lots. It's good. I mean, the word transparency is on lots of people's lips. What does it mean? So several years ago, our members sat down with the team at Understanding Patient Data, actually, and we wrote the transparency standards from a patient perspective. And those are the ones that have now rippled through various iterations with hundreds of groups around the country. But it came, essentially, the essence was from patients thinking about how we view transparency with data. Our members, our policy is really to encourage better ways of working. So we've run sessions on SDEs, TREs and the like. And yes, they make sense. They make good sense in what they're trying to do, in that they provide an added layer of security rather than giving data away to research groups where it just sort of a fire and forget process where data controllers will give a ginormous big floppy disk of data to a researcher and then you can't really track what goes on with it. So we understand that SDEs, TREs make sense and that they can work in a better way. But there's some real concern out there around proliferation and really who's interested in that in. So our members did have some questions about why we needed so many subnational TREs rather than one national one. And that was a conversation they got involved in. Then there's the UK perspective. Bear in mind that wherever you draw a boundary of a TRE or an SDE, patient lifestyles, patients don't give a stuff about boundaries. Lots of our members go to different hospitals, different clinical settings, which span all sorts of boundaries. So it's actually no use to them. So there's some real concern out there about, are we just building more silos which are more secure, but actually we're still building silos where we can't do what we want to do with the data. And then there's a fundamental principle which our members really are strong about. This is why Use My Data was formed in the first place. the data access delays. Data access is seems to me getting worse from the reports we get from a researcher's perspective. Are SDEs and TREs going to make that better? If so, how and when? Is it going to cost? And will it work for everybody? So there's a real concern about data access delays. That's the thing that troubles our members most, I think. Why is research being delayed? If a researcher is waiting 18 months to get access to data, and at the end of the work, their research said we could save 100 lives a year by doing this particular intervention, well, by definition, we've already lost 150 lives with 18 months delay. So there's some real practical considerations that patient voices feel quite strongly about. If you skip the next slide, Pete, I think Kerry might pick up from her perspective. Kerry.
I think we want to go back one slide, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the one. So patients and the public should be involved in all discussions right from the start, not just used as a tick box at the end. And if patient, as Chris has already said, you know, patients are experts of their own disease, but to help them keep up to date with what's going on, they need to be supported with education sessions, which are available through Use My Data. And if you want to run one, have a word with Chris afterwards. And then if you go to the next slide, you know, the benefits of being a member of Use My Data. Ideally, everybody who's in a PPIE group for an SDE or a TRE can be a member. I did it the other way round. I used the fact that I was a member of Use My Data to join the governance and advisory board of an SDE. But you are part of a community, which means that your voices can be heard a lot better. And you will be given the opportunity to use that voice and influence policies and decisions and practices. And next slide. And I'll hand back to Chris now.
Yeah, so just briefly to mention, we've even mentioned different events that are taking place. I think you need to put this one in your diary, 24th of June next year. It'll be the first National Patient Data Awareness Day. To celebrate that, we're having a National Patient Data Day conference in Leeds, one-day conference designed by patients, relatives and carers, for patients, relatives and carers, but with professionals there as well. So it's going to be a mixed audience. But the entire subject matter has been designed by patients. Things that they want to understand, they want to celebrate around data, and people they want to bring together to ask questions about and to discuss things, to build that community. So you could see virtually everybody in this call would have an interest in that. And certainly your PPI members would certainly have an interest in this. And I would encourage you, all of you, to get in touch and think about how might you want to be represented in a setting such as this to explain what the SDE TRE community is doing. So there's a real opportunity there for you to come along in the autumn. You can either contact me, you can go via Pete's, or you can go via Kerry, whichever, or go via the website. But it's certainly something to have in your diaries for next year. I think was that the only slide, Pete? Was that the last one? Yeah, I think it was. I suppose the last thing I'll leave you with is Use My Data is independent of any individual projects. Our members are involved in hundreds of different projects and programs and oversight groups. The real benefit is building that independent patient community. And I would seriously encourage all of you out there who've got PPIA members to point them in the direction of Use My Data. I'm happy to come and talk to them, but they can just join online, get access to any education session they want. They've got access to me literally 24 hours a day because everybody has my phone number and my email for any data question they get. And lots of people do email me. I'm in a meeting. This has just been said. I don't understand it. A part of my role with Alison now is to respond to things like that. But even the education sessions where they want to help themselves learn more, become more involved, ask us to put on a session for them on a particular topic, that's what we do. So we become a useful add-on to everything each of your SDE TRE worlds provide. But I think we could really help you here. And I'll be quiet now, Pete.
No need to be quiet, everyone. That's this is what we're here to do, to talk and share our thoughts. Thank you so much again, Kerry and Chris, for that, along with Samira and Sadie and Tudor. And thank you. We are now have had an hour of us talking about listening to these experts tell us their thoughts and views in a large round question about what does that mean for TREs and SDs in our type of world. The way we would like it now to work on is, so tell us more about your thoughts. We'd like you to talk about how you reacted to those great content pieces. What was your observations? What would you like to say? What do you think you didn't hear? What did you want to reinforce? You can do that two ways. One is to react with a hands up through the react icon there on your screens, and then hopefully a hands up will come up, and then we can go from top to tail. They'll come up in order, and you please, when you do, express your views and the like. There's another way, if you feel and you don't want to be recorded, both your image or your voice, then by all means use the Q&A to raise your point, and we'll try and keep an eye on that as well. But encourage you to, in a spirit of openness, speak whatever you feel, and what are your thoughts on what you have heard, and what are your views on how the public should be involved in the move towards a federated world. Kaz, you have your hand up.
So I'd make a comment quickly while folks have a second to think. I really enjoyed all those presentations, and it's an area of work that I've been familiar with but not actively engaged in. For a separate project, I'm thinking about doing something with researchers' data about communities and community engagement. And I'm aware that many of the frameworks and kind of models that were been talked about here would also be useful for researchers to understand how we're handling their data. So when we talk about patients, it makes it feel like it's almost an other thing, patients and researchers. But actually, there's so much that we can learn from here from how we build our own understanding of how data is used, for example, in gathering community intelligence and data service models and stuff. So thank you so much for those things. I'm going to look back through the notes and make sure that I've grabbed everything that might be useful, and make sure that it's attributed to the work that patients have done to help develop explainability in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Cass. Other people on the call? Hi, Simon.
So 3 hands for one go now. Yeah, so one of my thoughts was how we actually get sure there's adequate funding for people to get involved in, say, research projects. It's like, when I'm involved in projects, I always think, well, it'd be nice to get someone involved here, and not necessarily always formally. Sometimes you just want someone on hand. But the problem is, like, how do you adequately compensate someone who, for just providing, say, occasional input and advice? Is it sort of thing that, say, existing organisations can cover potentially, because somehow maybe you get your own block grant that says you are now empowered to just go out and help people, or do we need some other funding mechanism?
Thank you, Simon. Anthony.
Yeah, I've heard about training members of the public and patients, but I think actually it's more about training the team and the people working with the members of the public, because if you train members of the public and patients, they stop being lay. And actually, you want that rawness, you want those questions. So it's all about how you explain it in real life terms, like you explained to me earlier. So I think some of this is not trying to speed up meetings and cut time for questions and answers, by letting people discover the basics as you go along. I'm a real advocate for support rather than training. And then, as Simon says, there's the issue of money. So I talk about the toilet roll aisle recruitment method. So if you went into Aldi, Tesco's and Waitrose and went to the toilet roll aisle and scooped up all the people there, you would have a whole cross-section of society. You'd have mechanics from garages, you'd have potters, you'd have people who worked on the checkouts, you'd have people from all walks of life. And one of the problems about public involvement and patient involvement is that it is predominantly white, middle-class, retired people that get involved because they've got the time and they're not worried about the money. Yeah, they've got an income already. And this is blighted public involvement for years, that unless we can pay someone reasonable compensation for them to take a day off or an afternoon off, it blocks involvement. And Involve and NIHR haven't helped this by setting a £25 an hour rate, where if you're on a 0 hours contract as a mechanic, you're going to be earning more than that. But if you take you're going to have to take the whole afternoon off to take part in a meeting that's only an hour, you're only going to get 25 quid. So there's some reworking of how people are paid and how much people are paid that's necessary to involve the whole public, and not just elements of the public. But I'm heartened by many of the stories that we've heard today. Lastly, what I would say is we need to ensure that the people that get involved as members of the public and patients are members of the public and patients and aren't like super informed people. So I always talk about a lay patient, a lay person, and a lay patient is someone who's not medically trained and has never worked in a profession allied to medicine, because otherwise they've got all this insider knowledge. Just like if you were doing research into garages and works on cars, you wouldn't let car mechanics come and be on that panel. You'd want customers that come in with their cars. So how do you recruit the members of the public that I call a green, as in uninformed, and so they can gradually discover the subject and really give that in-depth content that you really need from the public, so that any member of the public can actually look at the project paperwork, look at the research website, and really understand it, because you've got those voices there from the ground roots, the grassroots.
Thanks, Anthony. I think, Rob, you did have your hand up. Did you take it down on purpose? I can't see it up any longer.
I did, because Anthony was pretty much answering the question I was going to ask,
Perfect.
Which was how do you reach, people who aren't motivated in the way Tudor was, for instance. And Tudor, if you're still here, thank you again for your insights, and your presentation was fantastic. How do you get those? And you go to the toilet roll aisle in Aldi, Audi. You would get middle class people if you went to the toilet roll aisle in Audi, wouldn't you? But how do we? What mechanisms are missing? And you highlight some of them, Anthony. But are there any other mechanisms that are missing?
Rob, if I may, the recruitment one is quite interesting, because I think people go down lots of formal recruitment, put an advert in the paper, kind of have interviews and interview people. And to me, all the recruitment I do is just talk to people. I recruited a train driver the other week. I was on a train going to Dundee and landed up sitting opposite the driver that was taking us from Edinburgh. And he was taking the train all the way to Aberdeen. And he left school with no qualifications, and he took a bit of convincing that actually he could be involved in research and he was good enough and that he wasn't thick. And I was just like, you drive a train, you look after thousands of people on your train, you know the engineering of your train, you know the railway. Yes, it's taken time for you to learn it, but your voice and opinion is as good as anyone else's. And so I just talk to people. I've recruited people at bus stops, on trains, in different, all sorts of different settings. I think contacting community groups is great, but I think there's a caveat of being careful about contacting charities, because charities often they often have their bias as well, and the patients involved in those charities often pick up on the charity's mission rather than what patients want. And that's not saying that the charity's missions are bad, they're not. But if you look at, you know, some successful charities in healthcare that have done really well, like Diabetes UK has really lifted diabetes care, and some of the cancer charities have done as well. But it's kind of skewed the field, because if you ask someone what's the most common cancer, they'll say breast cancer, and yet the most common cancer is lung cancer. So it's kind of you know, be careful how you put the lovely mix of people together. And the last thing is, I try and put groups of people together and have a whole social side, so that it isn't just about the project. It's a social group of people working on a project, and doing that means people get on far better. And then when there's a disagreement about something, it's friends disagreeing with each other rather than the group suddenly being split over an issue. People really learn to debate in a nicer way, which is rare sometimes in patient communities, because sometimes you get all these splits and factions.
Thank you both. I'm refraining from asking questions, but Sadie, you've got your hand up, and then Chris.
Yeah, just to say thank you to Anthony. I think recruitment is a really important question, and it's not an easy one either. And I guess I didn't say in my presentation, but beyond kind of bringing people together, we've also done work with an organisation called Working with Everyone, who specifically works with kind of more marginalised groups, those who might not feel psychologically safe, coming to a kind of broader meeting with 100 others, and really working with organisations that have those trusted relationships with groups and with individuals who might not otherwise think that they can get involved, and actually giving them some ownership in running those conversations and helping you to make sure that it's appropriately framed. But yeah, I was just going to echo what Anthony was saying. It's a really hard challenge, but a really important one for us to try and discuss.
Thanks, Sadie. Chris?
I actually thought Sadie was going to talk about the work OneLondon had done, where they did actually think very hard about bringing together lots of different people from different groups and different lifestyles. But she might want to pick up on that. Just some of the points that people fed back on, which I thought were really interesting. First one was funding. Here's a little challenge for you. Add up how much we're spending on TREs, SDEs across the country, and then add up how much we're spending on patient involvement or engagement around the country. And every time I ask anybody in seniority what's the biggest problem and challenge we've got around using data effectively, is it technology, is it data scientists, or is it public perceptions and public support? They always say, oh, it's public support. And yet the budget for public support and engagement is pitiful. I think London did a great job in finding money to do the work they've done continually over a number of years, but that hasn't been possible for the rest of the country. You know, we run an absolute shoestring, so we only have a certain amount we can do. We cannot, as an organisation, go out to members, to the wide public. We just couldn't afford to do it. That's not what we're geared up to do. So it's a real challenge. Nobody really is geared up to fund PPI, public involvement. It's a real challenge for us all the time. Just a couple of other specific things. I think that was Anthony mentioned. People stop being lay. Maybe Simon. People stop being lay if you train them up. I hear that a lot, and it's a fair point. The trick is to bring a throughput of people coming through. So people who joined Use My Data at the start knew very little about data, and now they know a bit more. And then your other ones have come in. Kerry's a great example where he came in knowing, smiling at me, I was going to say pretty much nothing, but now she knows a bit more and has got the ability and the confidence to join other groups, and then we bring other people on. So I think it's a development pipeline we're trying to develop, where we're trying to build a more engaged group of people, recognizing that you also need proper lay people who know very little or nothing to do that work some work as well. but it's not either or. You need both. Did a bit was mentioned about money, £25 for an hour. So we follow standard NAHR, right? So if somebody's coming to a meeting for an hour and they have to do preparation, then they have to prepare for whatever amount of things, pay them for that time. The every bit of money we get in goes on paying for honorary time for patients. Incidentally, we did a just from predominantly white, retired, typical audience. We did a census of our members, and the map of our members in terms of age, geography, gender, ethnicity maps virtually exactly onto the treated patient population published in England. So we did think about that. It's a really fair point. But we did do some work to think about that. What was going to mention? No, stop there.
Any other points or observations that they'd like to make? Rob, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, it's related to the funding point that Chris was making, and I was replying to Amy's question in the chat. So Amy will forgive me if I recall that in Edinburgh, Datalock had really good results in recruitment for some of the studies they did through Ipsos in Scotland. There are groups out there who will do this. They're very good at recruiting panels. They are expensive. Does anyone, and this is a genuine question to people who know more than I do about setting up research, are these costs easy to claim for? Are they easier than I think? And should we simply be using, making more use of groups out there who can arrange, genuinely well-sampled panels of people to engage in research? I don't know. It's not something I've ever done. Is it easier than I think? And if not, what can we do about it?
I'll answer that. I don't think it's easy. Otherwise, we'd have all done it. From my perspective, we don't have any money to do that sort of recruitment. So what we're doing is finding people by happenstance, circumstance. The conversation with the train driver was really good because I'd done exactly the same with a group of 3 people on a train journey where they got stuck last week, and we started talking, and I gave them an email address, and the 2 of them or 3 have signed up as members now. It's really effective, but it isn't big scale stuff, which is why it's very difficult for an organisation like us to scale. Yeah, always difficult.
I'm going to go to Samira, as Anthony, you've spoken before first, but.
Thank you, Pete. Yeah, just on Rob's question around kind of resource and how easy it is to actually find resource. I think I agree with what everybody said, how it's a huge challenge. And PEDRI held a roundtable a couple of weeks ago around the challenges for project level PPIE. And I think we reached consensus that one of the biggest challenges was actually resource when it came to doing effective public involvement and engagement. And my background is from working with NIHR, so I used to work with the National Institute of Health Research, and we used to have small pots of funding that people could apply for, which was specific to PPIE, because they knew that pre-grant stage, you don't actually have any funding for PPIE, and you need to look within your organizations. And I can sympathize with all researchers who do actually want to do really good PPIE, but don't have the resource to be able to do it within their organizations. And I think there's a real need for something similar to that, where we would have like a funding grant pot or something where people could apply for to do really good PPIE in their projects. I think it's really important that something like that is actually set up so people have access to funding as well. But that's something I think that PEDRI is looking into more detail for as well, and working with HDR UK for as well. The other thing that I wanted to comment was on how do we reach kind of different diverse groups and the different mechanisms to be able to do that. And I think the key is that, one size definitely does not fit all. And I think we really need to think about the project and the target population. And there's been mention of, community groups and reaching, you know, kind of gatekeepers to be able to reach different communities, etc., which I think is a really good way as well. But I think with data as well, specifically, it is really challenging. And I agree with Chris, you need both. You need people that have got experience, because when we think about diversity, we also need to think about cognitive diversity. And it would be really unfair to go to Tesco and, or, you know, go down the toilet paper aisle and bring some Joe Blogs on the street to come and be involved in a data project who had no knowledge at all and could not contribute meaningfully because of the lack of knowledge. So I think that's why it's really important that we do think about data literacy, data training. But Anthony, you made a point about how education is important for researchers as well. And I couldn't agree more with you. When we developed the good practice standards, these are actually for organizations to adopt. And it is really important that the researchers think about how they engage with the public and the different steps that they need to take as well to engage with the public. So there's a driver project at HDR UK around big data for complex disease, and we're working with PhD students that are very new, early career researchers that have been exposed to PPI, need to do PPIE, and they have no idea how they will bring people in. So we're working with them to kind of help them understand the benefits of PPIE and how it could actually influence and impact their project and the different ways and mechanisms that they can engage the public. So it's definitely a two-way thing. And I think our standards around kind of mutual benefit and two-way communication is really, really important as well.
Anthony.
Yeah, I want to touch on 2 points, actually 3 points probably. The funding bit is really key, because if you know, if someone's self-employed, just taking time out of an afternoon or a day, I think the problem with the Involve is that, yes, it's an hour's meeting and you get an hour's preparation, but it's very difficult to compensate for the whole half day that you're actually losing. So I think when we're looking at paying people, we should think in half days rather than hours. I kind of disagree on the recruiting completely green people, and the reason is, what I tend to do is the green people tend to have varying degrees of greenness. So you might have someone who does understand a bit, and then if the team are all trained up to understand, why do we do public involvement? Why is it important? How do you get the best out of members of the public and patients? What are the sort of things you can do to support and encourage members of the public and patients to speak and share their ideas and ask questions? And then what we have is we have a WhatsApp group just for the just for the public members and the patient members. And during meetings, the chat that goes on in there at the beginning of projects is huge, with people saying, I don't understand this, I don't understand that. And what it does is it means people can air stuff without losing, well, if they haven't got the confidence to speak in the meeting, they can air stuff in the WhatsApp. And then I or the other co-app can actually share that in the meeting and say, some members of the group don't understand this, don't understand that. Gradually, their confidence grows to ask questions in the meeting. And if the team are already trained up not to make people feel dumb for asking a question, then, you know, it flows. And so actually having those very green people, because they ask questions that are so interesting, that need asking time and time again, about how stuff works and why is it like that. And so, yeah, I actually think having a mixture of people, very, very uninformed and informed, is really important. And then lastly, there are lots and lots of seldom heard communities. So until recently, I haven't been on a single project that has had a single person from the deaf community. And recently on a project, we decided to go and meet with a community group of deaf people. And they were amazed because they'd never been asked to be involved in research in their lives. They'd always been excluded, and they just didn't know it was going on. There's other groups like that out there that just never get included. So I think it's about thinking, you know, thinking about the people that are missing from around the table that should be there. even people with learning disabilities, which again is challenging. It takes more time. And I think this is the thing, PPIE does complicate things, and it does need time and it does need investment. I think in healthcare research, between 5 and 10% of the project budget should be committed to PPIE to do really meaningful public involvement. And maybe with TREs, you know, a reasonable percentage of the budget needs to be given to PPIE.
Thank you. Amy, you've got your hand up.
I do. I don't know how to lower it now. Oh, I do. Okay. I am really enjoying this discussion. I'm enjoying some of the ideas that are coming up. I've thought about making it jury duty as well, like jury duty, but that kind of makes it a requirement of everybody to be involved in the research. And we've talked about compensation in terms of money, but there are other parts of being involved in research that I think are compensatory. It's not just about money, and I'm not sure that we talk about that enough. I'm not saying that should replace money, but I think making a difference to research can help people want to be involved more. I do like the idea of a big public debate. I think we should get Donald Trump or Jeremy Paxman involved, but I don't think we can afford them if we can't afford much PPIE in the first place. Did I have another point? No, that was it for now.
Thank you. Anyone else? Because I've got something I'd like to add, but I feel that would be abusing my position as facilitator.
No, go ahead, Pete.
Oh, I had another one very quickly. The other thing about the compensation and getting people involved or encouraging recruitment, one of the things that we did do in Datalock was to make sure, and we don't do it on a regular basis, maybe we need to rethink this, is we did our workshops and things, our one-off workshops or relatively few series of workshops outside of working hours so that people didn't need to take a half day off their regular job. This was kind of an extra thing. It's obviously not, well, maybe it is something that we could consider on an ongoing basis, that sometimes, oh, okay, I need to work late because we've got a meeting that includes a lay member this time or something like that. I don't know.
Thank you, Amy. Anyone else with a thought? My observational thought is more around why do we have PPIE activities apart from the obvious? Is it because we're worried that otherwise someone might say, well, I don't like any of this, I'm going to fearmonger and create messages, and we can't back up why we did it and that we did have people involved? Is it because there's no large voice or face of public engagement or data research? Who would we trust as a public, as a community of people in the UK, to say this is a good thing, you should allow it? Is there no figure person whose voice would convince many people that everything is good and they shouldn't worry? Why is it that we and what is it about federation that would expand and enhance and extend the risk / worry / whatever? That would be my set of questions, I guess. So in answer to my own questions, you know, I'm not sure there's many people in the public eye around science that would be trusted, apart from possibly the likes of David Attenborough, someone like that. And I'm be intrigued what other people's thoughts. I'm trying to inject a different type of discussion into our discussion. So I see that Cass, you've put your hand up, and then Sadie.
Yeah, the idea of someone, say David Attenborough or that type of figure, saying yes, you should trust this thing, I don't think that's the right angle. I see PPIE as a means for gaining more varied perspective on whatever it is that you're doing, and the more varied perspective you can get, the more robust the product will be, or whatever the output will be. And I think it serves an important role to remind us that we don't know everything. Not only do we not know everything, but we shouldn't assume that we do. You know, it's yeah. So I don't think it's about decreeing that you shalt trust this. It's more about like, what more do we need to do to demonstrate? What more can we learn from engaging with folks outside of our normal spheres?
Thank you. Sadie.
Yeah, I guess to link to what Cass just said as well, I think even within the kind of research community or within kind of those working within or on SDs, there isn't always consensus around some of these contentious issues. So I guess as an example, you know, the London SD's application of the national data opt-out to de-identified data, there were differing views amongst professionals as well. And I think sometimes inviting the public into those conversations can help us navigate a way forwards where something isn't straightforward or there's lots of different directions it can take. And I think involving the public, you know, there's maybe sometimes a fear that it's going to restrain what's possible, but actually I think it can give us more confidence in kind of being bold, because we understand the public's expectations, we understand their red lines, and we can kind of push to the boundaries and work out what is acceptable and how we can best do that, rather than maybe, as Cass said, making assumptions that the public won't be okay with something when actually the appetite might be there if you actually invite them into that conversation. So I think it gives us more confidence, but it can also help unpick some of those tricky issues that even professionals working in this space have different views on.
Thank you, Sadie. Tudor.
Yes, some very good points there. And indeed, when PPIE is well run, particularly at the beginning of a project, it can be very impactful. But in the space of TREs, I do envision a future where you don't have to recruit for PPIE. It's almost embedded in the system. It attracts a flow of people that have a view of what happens to their data, can raise issues. I like to think of it a bit more continuous in that sense, because in 5 years' time we should really have fewer TREs than we have now, and bigger. Ideally, we would have one, or a federated model where some actions spread across all TREs, including PPIE. So the citizen agency model is one that could embed this, I think, because if anyone can come and see their own data, it's just there.
Thank you, Tudor. Samara.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, just in response to your question, Pete, about, you know, for me, and I think, you know, everything is underpinned by patient benefit. Everything we're doing is very much around patient benefit. So it absolutely makes sense that we are involving the patients and the public. And I think, you know, we use data without explicit consent from members of the public. So it's absolutely crucial that we increase transparency and trust, I think, is important, because if we want people to share their data, then we need to be making sure that they have a voice at the table and they're involved throughout. And I think patient benefit for me would kind of underpin the reasons why we do it, and the reasons that we have to do patient involvement and engagement, because all the research that we do, the end goal is to lead to patient benefit ultimately. So I think that's really, really important. And then already what Sadie's mentioned around acceptability and importance, I think that is also crucial as well. So when we're thinking about our research questions, you know, how actually relevant are these to the public, and will they have an impact in real life? I think that's another thing which can really support the research process. But there was a discussion about the motivations why members of the public get involved in research and, you know, across data research. But I think there's something about the motivations behind why we need to involve them. And I think maybe being more explicit about that is really important as well.
Tudor.
Yes, you raised a very good point, Samara, about the consent. It's true. We don't ask people for consent in use of this data, and it should be there. The consent should be there. We have the Scotland model with no opt-out. We have the English model with one opt-out, and they're both limiting in their own ways, because trust varies over time, and people need the ability to offer more trust, which we can, as well as to retract some of that trust, which we cannot, other than the opt-out, which is quite a drastic measure, I think. So for as long as we have this limitation of fixed trust investment, we will need a PPIE, but a citizen agency model is one where patients can select how much trust they invest or hold back in some projects, and it gives that variability, that dynamic adjustment. Oh, that's the vision, at least.
Yeah. Any other questions? Because I'd like to add on to that question. Okay, Samara, you mentioned, not picking on you at all, but you mentioned about, you know, we don't often ask the consent or permission of the individuals whose data we're making use of. In a future, as I think Tudor was describing, in a future where many more people, and I have to use our future health as an example here, where we have at least 1.5 million already, probably larger, people who have actively said yes through a detailed consensual story to say, yes, please put all my data together in one place and use it for all sorts of mechanisms and purposes. If the future is a reconsenting large amount of power, and that's TRE enabled, but not TRE delivered, only SDE delivered. It's a collection of SDEs of national critical information about people whose data it is they bring together in projects, such as our future. If that is a future model, what does the panel think about how those consent or agency, citizen, patient, public agency type of thing, how does that change the role of PIE in projects? Because it's different purposes. I feel we've not talked about the purposes explicitly enough. That's my own observation. We've talked about engaging the public to understand a project in a layperson's way, or we've understood how we could make an improvement, or we've talked about deliberation on very difficult topics which need a wide discussion. It's not something you decide over reading a document. You have to really talk about it. But there's the other type of engagement, which is, I think I'm not going to use Tudor, but examples of people who want to engage because they've got something they want to either learn about or progress, and they want to actively be involved in the project, not just in a giving way of their data or samples on them or whatever it is, taking part in the project actively. But how do we encourage that? Because that would be a world which would be a fully much more engaged public in research, with many more people able to be talking about their lived experiences of being part of research, which would make the population as a whole be more engaged in research and telling stories over the dinner table about what they've been doing in research. Just like I think both Anthony and Chris mentioned when they've met people on the train and talked about what they do. It'd be that type of debate, but scaled up by millions of people. And what does that do to public engagement? Is that what we need to move the agenda of federated data research in the UK forward, question mark.
To just jump in, Pete, I think when I mentioned kind of explicit consent, that's one reason why we should engage the public. And even if we had, changed hearts and minds, and we've got people involved through the research, what you mentioned there, the groups, I think we're still not reaching the whole population. And I think we need to take that into account. We'll never reach the whole population, but we need to think about diversity. And I think we need to take it on a needs-based approach as well. It's not about involving everyone and everything. I think it's very much dependent on the projects as well, depending on the data that you're using as well. So there's lots of factors that you need to take into consideration when you're thinking about patient and public involvement. So for me, if I was thinking of a specific project that's working with a specific data set, I would base my patient and public involvement around that project. So I would take a targeted approach to bring in people that could kind of represent the data that I'm potentially using. And often it's not population data that we're using. It could be data that's completely different and not related to the public, but it's all about patient benefit. So it's getting that public voice in to the actual project and making sure that actually it's acceptable from their perspective as well. And then for me, I think it's a big thing is around trust and transparency. So everything that we're doing, we need to be able to make sure that we are transparent. And even if we've got groups set up and there's people having conversations about data at the dinner table, I think we will still need patient and public involvement in projects and across UK TREs to be able to be involved in making sure that the work that we're doing is publicly acceptable. So that would be my kind of take on it.
Anthony, and then maybe other speakers could respond to the general questions. Thanks, Samara.
Yeah, so I think if we didn't do public involvement or patient involvement, it could be seen as very Orwellian, and it is. There's already loads of conspiracy theories out there about data and what happens. There were loads of conspiracy theories about COVID at the time, and there's still conspiracy theories about the vaccines. So public involvement doesn't address these. It does to a point. It gives organizations and projects credibility because they have involved the public. And a really good example is the film industry. So before a film is actually launched, there are special screenings of the film to representative groups of the public based on ONS data. And these companies will show different versions of the film, sometimes different endings, to see which film people like the most. And then that leads to the film being launched with the best version. And I think that's a really good example of public involvement in producing the best version of work that we can do. I don't actually think it's about, I think people being interested in research is useful, but I think actually they come with a vested interest of they're already interested in it. I think when you recruit people who aren't interested right from the beginning, you get a whole fresh perspective that you don't get. In healthcare research, you get an awful lot of retired NHS managers and sort of admin people that want to get involved in research when they retire. It's kind of like, it's great, but they bring a very skewed perspective. So I think in my perfect world, people would come into research and they would then go. They would come on a project and they would then go. And one or two people from that group would say, well, actually, Anthony, I'd like to do what you do. I'd like to be a co-applicant. I'd like to support other people to be involved in research. I'd like to learn some group facilitation skills. I'd like to learn about research methodology so that I can help other people understand it. And so you'd naturally bring on a few people from those groups. But one of the problems about public involvement at the moment is people get involved and they never leave. And you find people sitting on projects 10 years on, 20 years on in some cases, and the groups are never refreshed. So there is this thing of a need for refreshing people and having fresh people passing through. So in a perfect world, I think people would know about research more, and they would know they could get involved. And yeah, market research is doing very interesting steps in this at the moment. There's all sorts of market research companies offering £90 for an hour's focus group online about whatever subject, and you sign up to a list, and you get daily, you get sort of 3 or 4 offers of focus groups you could be involved in to do with all sorts of consumer issues. So that's just an idea. That's just my perspective on it.
Thank you. Alan.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of pick up a bit on what you were saying, Anthony, about the sort of Orwellian, fears and PIE being sort of central to, preventing that. And I wonder whether or not we do enough to distinguish between, I guess, bringing and linking data for operational reasons about decisions about individuals that I suspect lots of the members of the public think that their data might be used for and are often quite concerned about, or conversely think that would be of great benefit, versus the sorts of things that we're more typically involved, which is where the data is really a sort of public good. It's not really sort of about decisions about a particular individual, the way that they should be treated, but to get sort of more sort of population understanding. And I wonder whether or not we make a good enough case collectively within that discussion about that distinction, and about how, do we need to be making a better case for how this data is really a public good, that this is bringing public benefit, not necessarily directly to individuals who provide that data, but to many others. And that's a difficult thing to do, because lots of those benefits are quite hard to track. It takes years often between, a research study being done and benefits being sort of seen. But I just wondered, I'm not sure this has come up much in the discussion so far about sort of, articulating the benefits and the separation between operational and research use. But any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Balint. Sadie, you were next, and then Tudor.
Yeah, I was just going to come back in on that kind of last point, because I think particularly the first OneLondon deliberation did talk Balint to some of those different uses. So kind of data use for direct care, and actually particularly the public expecting us to be more joined up than we currently are in that place, but also built onto kind of other use cases as well. So kind of service planning, knowing where best to put things based on the data, and the importance of having accurate data to make some of those decisions, through to kind of research projects as well. And actually support is there for all of those things as long as the right safeguards are in place. But I think we have started to have that discussion with the public around different uses of data. So both kind of direct care for you as an individual, but also that kind of wider public benefit as well. So that conversation has started.
Thanks, Sadie. Tudor, you were next. Then Chris.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, very good points. And I'd like to say to Balint, you're limited in how much of a good case you can make, because as I mentioned, this trust and public perception varies, and it's more than what we do here or what researchers do in this country. It's what happens in the world. So, for example, 23andMe, there were gossip of them going bankrupt, and everyone was worried what's going to happen to their DNA data when they donated it there. These sort of news happens, breaches happen in different places, and people are going to have a less willingness to be involved in research when those happens. The most reassuring thing you can do is to show people their data, that it's here, it has not been leaked, we're tracking it, and we're keeping using it for the public good. That's I can't see another way around it. Oh, and I also agree with Anthony's point that some people stay a long time in PPIE panels. And I agree that there needs to be a turnover. That's what I meant by embedded PPIE systems. People are drawn into it and eventually shuffled. Thank you.
Chris.
We're just thinking about a couple of those things. So the idea of focus groups was mentioned. So we've been locked in focus groups, either in large scale pieces of work, as is happening at the minute with NHS England, or in project specific pieces of work. And market research does this all the time. You pay your 90 quid, you go on a focus group, and that's the end of it. The other aspect that I've seen, which did seem to be coming much more stronger across the sort of the engagement world, was this concept of citizens' juries, which is a much more formalized process of putting a jury together, which has to be selected to be representative of X, whatever X is. Goes through a formal process. You get expert witnesses called. Somebody runs it, and it's quite a really structured model over a series of days. And given the fact that we've based most of our law in this country based on court cases, juries, and other things, well, maybe there's an opportunity here to beef up the process of running citizens' juries and bring some of those juries results together, start to build effectively data case law, data jury law, data citizen law, something which can be used more readily. Because I've been a witness on 3 juries, and they've been really, really well run, very well structured, really formalized. Everybody's kept in line. And the results I thought were quite good, quite sharp. But then it sort of disappears off and something else happens. And I wonder whether a jury approach, something much more formalized, would be a better way of developing this sort of stuff. Thoughts?
Thanks, Chris. Any thoughts?
I just wanted to mention just what Chris said there. I was in a conference in Brussels last week, and it was organised by the European Patient Forum, and they had the same idea, Chris. They felt that we needed like a citizen jury across Europe. So it's really interesting that you said that. And I think one of the organisations, or actually in the kind of has something in the pipeline, or they're planning something. So I'll try and dig that out and see if we can learn from that. So it would be great to see how they put that together. But maybe we could learn from some of our contacts and partners overseas.
Before Anthony, before we go to you, Sadie, this sounds very much like the deliberation panels. Is there anything you wanted to pitch in on that or not? Just before Anthony may change the topic. I'm not suggesting he is going to, but just wanted to check.
No, I think they're a really interesting method of engagement, and there definitely is lots of overlap with deliberation in terms of, you know, presenting both cases and making sure that you're being really transparent with the public about the pros and the cons, and the fact that there are different options available. And actually for some of the deliberative stuff, we did consider whether we wanted to have a citizens jury where there was kind of one fixed question where people voted on at the end. Instead, we moved towards the kind of having expectations, and we did some voting around the extent to which people agreed with those expectations. But I think where you've got a kind of clear question with differing views, I think it's a really interesting method of engagement.
But could I just say it felt to me that those expectation pictures, if it's like you described as a deliberation, or whether it's a jury with a decision to make, are you for or against, either of those two models does provide some degree of this representative group of the UK population said this. That doesn't need to be done again. It might be reinforced, like Chris was talking about case law. We don't need to go back and invent that again. We can build on that platform in a certain direction. I think that's the bit that I took very much from what I have heard. So thank you for your thumbs up. Anthony, to you, sir.
Yeah, I think the jury idea is interesting. How you run it to make it equitable is the question, because the juries I've been on weren't equitable. There were people on those juries who were far more powerful and made far more better cases for making a decision one way or the other than other people who were quite quiet. And so I worry that with the juries, you're going to get the most powerful people in the room are really going to lead it. I like to hear from everybody. Back before Zoom, when we did telephone conferences, I would talk about the telephone clock, and I would give everyone an hour around the table and have a virtual table, imaginary table. And we would go around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, however many people were there. And whatever anyone said, we would then go round and everybody would speak on that. And you could say pass, but it gave everybody an opportunity to speak. And I think the problem with juries, the problem with a lot of engagement, is that everybody isn't allowed to speak. And, you know, just back to the projects I've worked on with the WhatsApp group and building a community, is that it doesn't just stop, it doesn't stop when the meeting stops. People chat on the WhatsApp group all evening about something that happened in the meeting. People have thoughts and feelings that pop up later. So it is that thing. And the other thing that I do with new groups of people is we have a pre-meeting before the actual meeting to go, well, what is this project? Remind them what the project is, because they're not living and breathing it 5 days a week like everyone else. They've kind of like had 30 days of life and washing up and taking kids to school and just life. And so you have to sort of reintroduce people to a project each time, and warm them up to it. So it is this thing of, I think focus groups can be great because you can do a lot of scene setting. And the sort of focus stakeholder groups I've run in a community, I've got the best caterer from the area to come and do a meal. And that's one draw. And then the money is another draw. And then taking part is another draw. And I've had really successful sessions in sort of village halls and community centres, running groups like that with researchers sitting there recording the meeting, and asking questions about what do people want, what do people think. One was about safety in general practice. So you can imagine the conversation about general practice, about access and all the things that people thought were about safety for patients in general practice from their perspective. So yeah, I think it's about equal voice. How do you do that?
Okay, by the way, we do have a question in the Q&A, Pete, maybe. Do you want to get to now or after Sadie?
I'll just let Sadie, and then thank you, Simon. I spotted Stuart's question and I will read it out on behalf of Stuart.
I'll be really quick. I just think Anthony raised some interesting points there, and I guess there's something around kind of facilitators who are kind of leading involvement activities, feeling comfortable and having some tricks up their sleeves, such as, you know, going around a circle or having a pre-meet. And I know when we're kind of running events, we mix people up to avoid groupthink between sessions. We make note of who the quieter and more dominant characters are, and so that we can be more purposeful. If someone's quiet, being like, oh, you know, just saying to them during the break, do you want to sit next to me afterwards so I can make sure that I can hear you? So there's probably something about people sharing learning as well, about how can we make it as inclusive as possible, because there's so many different tips and tricks, but actually people might not know those.
Thank you, Sadie. I have a question in the Q&A regarding refreshing public panels. If the ethos of the panel is to be collaborative, brackets, i.e. reducing the power imbalances, close brackets, it is possible to ease group members out of the group in a way that matches that ethos, question mark, without setting a time limit in advance of joining. What do people, has anyone got an answer to that question? Is it possible to ease people out? Ease was in inverted commas. Anthony?
I've always found it much easier to work with distinct time limits. I was involved in the Royal College of GPs patient group, and when you joined, you knew the maximum was 6 years. That was it. It was kind of a really good the max anyone can do is 6 years. And it was actually in 2-3 year stints. So, you know, you might not get reappointed after 3 years, which is really important. And in fact, what we did was we appointed people for an initial year. At the end of the initial year, we'd appoint them for 2 years. And at the end of the 3-year period, we appoint for 3 further years. And that way, you know, there are some difficult characters out there. And I'm not saying their voices shouldn't be heard. But if you've got someone that continually disrupts a meeting, is really always never comes to meetings, you know, you've got to have some, got to have some boundaries and some sort of group agreement about these things. And I have no problem with time limits. Time limits set a nice boundary. It's a bit like meetings should start on time and end on time because it's just respect and it's a boundary. So I think groups need boundaries to make people feel safe. And a time limit boundary of membership is a really good one. But you can also say to people, but, you know, if you want to go on and learn how to facilitate, you can carry on being involved. But not everyone does that, and not everyone should do that, and that's absolutely fine. So I think there should be a time limit, but there should also be scope if people want to do more and want to move into more of a guiding, supporting role rather than being the patient voice in the room. And I apologise for the pug sneezing.
Thanks, Anthony. Sadie, you had a question up, and then Chris. And up and up.
Speaking, I guess, more from a general PPIE rather than deliberation here, but I think for things like kind of citizen reps, or if you're on a panel or a group, agree, I think having time limits is really helpful in, you know, creating that succession plan. So how can you involve existing reps in the recruitment of new reps or the training of new reps, kind of taking on board all that kind of knowledge and experience that they'll have learned through their involvement? How can you kind of give them that purpose and kind of bringing up and upskilling and supporting the newbies, maybe acting as mentors on an ongoing basis? I think there can be an ongoing role for people to play. It doesn't have to be a kind of hard cutoff if you've reached your 2 years and that's it. So I think being upfront and honest about that is really important.
Thanks, Sadie. Chris?
I'd say just said exactly the same thing as I was going to say. There's a natural time limit point for a project makes good sense, yeah. But the feedback I get from some of our members who are on research groups is when the research is finished, they're sort of thrown away. They feel as if their skills have been wasted. So I think the opportunity for those who do want to do more needs to be clever at helping those people out. If you're on a research groups which happens to be in Leeds and it finishes, then all you'll ever see is any other research groups which might be in Leeds. You probably just walk away and say, that's it. But if we could offer wider opportunities for people who want to bring on the next generation and pass on the knowledge and get involved in more different levels of things, but equally bringing in the new people on the ground to bring that real raw as well. But I just feel we're throwing away quite a lot of people at the minute, and that's certainly the feedback I've had from a lot of our members. They feel as if there's nowhere for them to go once they've finished their research, and that's part of the benefit being used my data. They've got involved in lots of other pieces of work and groups and activities beyond project when it's finished.
Thank you, Chris. So Stuart, I hope that helped give you some flavour and context from a few people who are clearly experienced in this and have had a wider voice. Any other questions or points? Any reflections that the speakers, presenters would like to give overall before we close up? I noticed the time is now 4:45, so we've done well to fill a very busy afternoon. Any more for any more? Okay, I'm not going to stretch it out. I wish to have a big thank you, online type thank yous to the tutors, to Sadie, to Samira, and to Chris and Kerry, please. That'd be very, very kind. It's very, very kind of you to spend your time preparing for this event, the time that we spent talking about how it might run and your contributions to how that structure was placed, and also all of the effort given to the session today. A really big thank you. And thank you to all of the people who spoke and raised questions and thoughts. That was super to see and hear. So we'll close this part of the session and just go to the last part, the wrap up and close, and maybe give you a few minutes back in your diary to go off and do whatever. So first of all, just reminders of those dates, the January 28th, March and June, and also June, if I've got the right date, 24th or 25th for the National Patient Day, and then September for the conference. More information coming soon. The invite for the January 28th is almost ready to go out. We will be sending it to the normal list, so please look out for that one and register yourself. You'll also get that link in the various materials that come from this session. Next steps, as always, we'll send a feedback form out. The link is actually open. It's right there now. We'd very much welcome your feedback on this event and the future. Thank you for your attendance. Also, look out for March and get involved in all the many channels. It's been great to have this discussion. I hope you all have good journeys wherever you're going if you have to. And thank you so much for attending today. It's been great.